true scary stories for sleep. Welcome to the Midnight Echoes. Before we dive into tonight's stories, I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see where our viewers are tuning in from. If you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, unwind, and prepare for tonight's eerie adventures. Wyatt Harkins was an experienced surveyor, and he loved the solitude and challenge of working in remote areas. The Oahe Wilderness was his latest assignment, vast and rugged landscape that promised both beauty and difficulty. Setting up camp, he felt the familiar excitement of exploring uncharted territory. The days were long and the work was hard, but Wyatt relished every moment. However, this trip would prove to be different from any other he had experienced. One evening, as Wyatt was finishing up his work, he noticed strange tracks near his campsite. They were large and unidentifiable, unlike any animal tracks he had seen before. The sight of them sent a chill down his spine. Dismissing it as a curious anomaly, he continued with his task. But the eerie feeling lingered. That night, the forest seemed unusually silent, and the sense of being watched was almost tangible. As darkness fell, Wyatt sat by his campfire, trying to shake off the unease. The crackling fire provided some comfort, but the shadows cast by the flames seemed to dance with an eerie life of their own. Suddenly, he heard a rustling noise in the bushes. Grabbing his flashlight, he shone it towards the sound. Saw nothing. The sense of dread grew stronger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. The next morning, Wyatt discovered that his camp had been ransacked. Supplies were scattered, and his equipment was damaged. The strange tracks were everywhere, adding to the chilling mystery. Fear gnawed at him as he tried to make sense of what had happened. Determined to finish his job, he repaired what he could and continued working, but the fear of another encounter loomed over him. As the days passed, Wyatt's fear intensified. The strange noises and the feeling of being watched became more frequent. One evening, while reviewing his maps, he heard a loud crash outside his tent. Stepping out cautiously, he saw a large, hunched figure moving through the trees. The sight was terrifying, and he quickly retreated into his tent, hoping it would pass. The figure lingered, its presence a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. Wyatt decided it was time to leave. The fear was too great, and his work was suffering. He packed his belongings and set off early the next morning, hoping to make it back to civilization without any further incident. As he walked, the sense of being followed never left him. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sent his heart racing. The wilderness, once a place of solace, had become a nightmarish landscape of fear. Hours into his journey, Wyatt realized he was lost. The unfamiliar terrain and his frayed nerves had led him off course. Panic set in as he tried to find his bearings. The sun was setting and the shadows grew longer, creating an eerie atmosphere. The fear of encountering the mysterious figure again was overwhelming. Wyatt pressed on, hoping to find a way out, before darkness completely enveloped him. Just as despair began to take hold, Wyatt stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It offered a temporary refuge, and he decided to spend the night there. The cabin was musty and dilapidated, but it provided shelter from the chilling fear outside. As he settled in, the eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creak of the old wooden structure. The sense of being watched was ever present, making sleep difficult. In the early hours of the morning, Wyatt was jolted awake by a loud bang. The door of the cabin swung open, and the large, hunched figure stood in the doorway. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, grabbing the nearest object for protection. The figure stepped closer, and Wyatt's fear reached its peak. Just as he was about to strike, the figure stopped and turned, disappearing into the forest. Wyatt wasted no time. He packed up his things and left the cabin, determined to find his way out of the wilderness. The fear drove him forward, and by mid-morning, he stumbled upon a trail that led him back to a ranger station. Exhausted and terrified, he recounted his experience to the rangers. They listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief. Wyatt's ordeal was over. The memory would haunt him forever. Years later, The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The strange tracks, the ransacked camp, and the large hunched figure are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the wilderness and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The Oahe Wilderness, once a place of challenge and beauty, had become a haunting chapter in Wyatt's life. Exploring Deep Creek Woods had always been a favorite pastime of mine. The dense forest was filled with mysteries and the promise of adventure. One evening, as the sun began to set, I ventured deeper than usual, enticed by the serene beauty of the place. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence fell over the woods. It was then that I saw it, a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen, a werewolf-like beast with glowing eyes that pierced the dusk. The creature stood on two legs, its body covered in thick, matted fur. It let out a chilling growl that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I navigated the twisted paths of the forest. The sounds of the creature's pursuit were deafening, branches snapping and leaves rustling. I didn't dare look back, fear propelling me forward. Somehow I managed to escape, bursting out of the woods and into the safety of my backyard. My friends, gathered around the fire pit, looked at me in shock. Between gasps, I recounted my encounter, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Their initial disbelief turned to concern as they saw the terror in my eyes. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to go back the next night, armed and ready to confront the creature. That night, we ventured into the woods together, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Eerie silence returned, and the air was thick with tension. We moved cautiously, our senses heightened. Suddenly, we heard the same chilling growl I had heard the previous night. The creature emerged from the shadows, more terrifying than I remembered. This time, we were prepared. We aimed our weapons, but the beast was fast, darting through the trees with unnatural speed. The confrontation was brief and chaotic. One of my friends, Mike, got separated from the group. The creature lunged at him, and a scream pierced the night. We rushed to his aid, but it was too late. Mike lay on the ground, lifeless, with deep gashes across his body. The sight was gruesome, and the horror of it all struck us to the core. We retreated, dragging Mike's body back to the clearing, the weight of our loss hanging heavily in the air. Back at my house, we called the authorities. They dismissed our story, attributing Mike's death to a bear attack. But we knew the truth. The creature in Deep Creek Woods was real, and it was dangerous. The haunting memories of that night stayed with us, a chilling reminder of the horrors lurking in the forest. We vowed never to return, the loss of our friend too great a price to pay for curiosity. The woods, once a place of wonder, had become a place of fear. The following weeks were a blur of grief and unanswered questions. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, creature's presence lingering in our minds. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent us into a panic. The once comforting darkness of the woods was now a source of dread. We avoided the forest, but the haunting memories were inescapable. The chilling encounter had changed us, leaving scars deeper than the physical one. One night, while sitting around the fire pit, we decided to honor Mike's memory by sharing our story. It was a way to process our grief and ensure that others knew the dangers of Deep Creek Woods. As we spoke, fear began to subside, replaced by a sense of solidarity. We had faced something terrifying and survived. The experience had bonded us in a way nothing else could. The chilling memories remained. So did the strength we found in each other. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The creature, the loss of Mike, and the haunting atmosphere of the woods are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the chilling reality that danger can be just around the corner. Deep Creek Woods will never be the same for us, forever marked by that fateful encounter. After losing my wife to cancer, I decided to take a camping trip with my dog Max to the Ozarks. The tranquility of the forest seemed like the perfect place to clear my mind. We set up camp near a serene lake, the sounds of nature offering a comforting backdrop. First night was peaceful, but things took a chilling turn the following evening. As the sun set, the atmosphere grew eerie, the forest falling into an unsettling silence. Max was the first to notice something was off. He started growling at the darkening woods, his hackles raised. I tried to calm him down, but his behavior made my own fear grow. I heard strange noises, rustling leaves and faint whispers that seemed to come from all directions. The once serene forest now felt ominous. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the eerie feeling was hard to shake. The next morning I decided to explore the area. I found an old, abandoned cabin not far from our campsite. The place was falling apart with broken windows and a door hanging off its hinges. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a look inside. Air was musty, and the floor creaked under my weight. I found remnants of old furniture and personal items, as if the previous occupants had left in a hurry. The cabin exuded a haunting atmosphere. That night, the strange noises returned, louder and more persistent. Max's growling turned into frantic barking. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, hoping to find the source of the disturbance. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the cabin. My heart raced as I shone the light towards the sound, saw nothing. I decided to investigate the cabin again the next day, hoping to find some answers. As I approached, I noticed fresh footprints leading inside. The realization that I wasn't alone sent a chill down my spine. Inside, the cabin felt even more oppressive than before. I found symbols carved into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize but felt inherently sinister. The air grew colder, and an eerie sense of being watched overwhelmed me. The third night was the worst. Noises outside were accompanied by the distinct sound of chanting. Fear was suffocating, and I knew I had to leave. I packed up our campsite in a hurry, my hands shaking with anxiety. As we made our way to the car, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The forest, once a place of solace, had become a haunting nightmare. The eerie atmosphere was almost tangible, wrapping around us like a shroud. We drove away, the tension slowly easing as we put distance between us and the campsite. Back home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The haunting experience in the Ozarks had left a lasting impact, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. I shared my story with friends, hoping to make sense of it all. Most were skeptical, but a few believed me, their own experiences lending credibility to my chilling encounter. Months passed, and the fear began to fade, but the memory never left. I avoided camping alone, the thought of returning to the Ozarks too much to bear. The experience had changed me, making me more cautious and aware of my surroundings. The once comforting silence of the forest was now a reminder of the eerie events that had unfolded. The haunting memories served as a constant reminder of the dangers that can lurk in unexpected places. Years later, the memory of that camping trip still sends shivers down my spine. The strange noises, the abandoned cabin, and the eerie chanting are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the chilling reality that danger can be just around the corner. The Ozarks will never be the same for me, forever marked by that terrifying weekend. Moving to Swamp Mava seemed like a fresh start. The once popular summer resort was now a ghost town, its decaying beauty both eerie and alluring. I was drawn to its mysterious charm, hoping to find some peace in the solitude. On my first night, I explored the area and stumbled upon an old library hidden deep in the woods. Its doors were locked, and the windows were covered in thick grime. Something about it felt oddly inviting. The next night, I was compelled to visit the library again. This time, the doors were open. As I stepped inside, I was greeted by the musty smell of old books and the creak of wooden floors. The place was filled with ancient tomes, their titles barely legible under layers of dust. A strange sense of calm washed over me, but there was also an undercurrent of something more sinister. The library seemed to hold secrets, and I was determined to uncover them. At the stroke of midnight, a hidden door in the back of the library swung open. I hesitated. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a single book on a pedestal, its cover adorned with intricate designs. As I opened it, the room seemed to pulse with energy. The book's pages were filled with symbols and incantations, promising the power to turn back time. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I knew I had to be careful. Couldn't resist trying one of the spells. With a mixture of excitement and fear, I recited the words, feeling a strange warmth spread through my body. The world around me blurred, and I found myself back in my old life, before everything went wrong. It was like a dream come true. But the initial euphoria quickly turned into a haunting realization. Every change I made had unforeseen consequences, twisting the past in eerie ways. The more I used the book, the more addicted I became. Each night, I returned to the Midnight Library, drawn by its promise of control over time. But with every alteration, the present grew more distorted. The once comforting solitude of Swamp Mava turned into a chilling isolation. Shadows seemed to watch me, and the air grew thick with an unsettling presence. The library's power was both a gift and a curse. One night, I decided to undo all the changes I had made. I hoped to restore my life to its original state, free from the haunting consequences of my actions. As I recited the final spell, the world around me trembled. The library's walls seemed to close in, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. When the spell was complete, I found myself in a familiar yet unsettling reality. It was as if the fabric of time had been stretched too thin. The haunting presence in Swamp Mava intensified. I could feel it lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. The once peaceful nights were now filled with eerie whispers and strange noises. The library, once a place of wonder, had become a source of terror. I knew I had to leave, but the thought of abandoning the book and its power was equally terrifying. The line between reality and the supernatural blurred. In a final act of desperation, I decided to seal the book back in the hidden room and leave Swamp Mava for good. The thought of never returning to the Midnight Library was both a relief and a source of lingering fear. As I closed the hidden door, the air grew thick with a sense of finality. The book's power was contained, but its haunting presence would forever be a part of me. The experience had changed me, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. Leaving Swamp Mava, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The once alluring charm of the resort was now tainted by the eerie memories of the library and its dark secrets. The haunting experience served as a constant reminder of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond understanding. I vowed never to return, but the chilling knowledge of the library's existence would always be with me. It was a story I would carry for the rest of my life. Years later, the memory of Swamp Mava still sends shivers down my spine. The hidden library, the magical book, and the haunting consequences of my actions are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of time and the chilling reality that some secrets are best left undiscovered. Swamp Mava, once a place of solace, had become a haunting reminder of my darkest hour. It was a stormy night when I first stumbled upon the Midnight Library. I had been wandering the streets, trying to clear my mind, when I saw a dim light flickering from a narrow alley. Curiosity piqued. I followed the light and found an old, seemingly abandoned building. The door was slightly ajar, and a sign above it read, Midnight Library. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I stepped inside. The interior was unlike any library I had ever seen. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient books whose titles were written in languages I couldn't decipher. An eerie silence hung in the air, interrupted only by the occasional creak of the wooden floor. As I explored, I felt a strange energy, as if the library itself was alive. Suddenly, an old woman appeared from the shadows, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She introduced herself as Greta, the keeper of the Midnight Library. Her eyes sparkled with a knowing gleam as she guided me through the labyrinth of shelves. Greta explained that the books in this library possessed magical properties, capable of altering reality and time. My skepticism was quickly replaced by awe as she demonstrated the power of one of the books, the pages glowing with an ethereal light. The experience was both thrilling and terrifying. Greta handed me a book and encouraged me to open it. As I did, the world around me seemed to shift. I found myself transported to different times and places, each one more surreal than the last. The books in the Midnight Library were portals to other dimensions, and the possibilities were endless. The eerie sensation of being in multiple realities at once was both exhilarating and disorienting. The line between fantasy and reality blurred. As the nights went by, I returned to the library, eager to explore more of its secret. Each visit brought new adventures and strange encounters. One night, Greta showed me a book that allowed me to relive moments from my past. The opportunity to correct mistakes and make different choices was tantalizing, but I soon realized that changing the past had unpredictable and often chilling consequences. The library's magic was not without its dangers. The more I delved into the library's mysteries, the more I noticed its haunting presence. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and whispers echoed through the halls. Greta warned me that the library had a mind of its own, and it was easy to lose oneself in its depth. The thrill of discovery was tempered by the growing sense of unease. The library's power was both a gift and a curse, and I had to tread carefully. One night, I found a book that allowed me to see into the future. The visions were both mesmerizing and terrifying. I saw glimpses of events yet to come, some filled with joy, others with sorrow. The knowledge of the future was a heavy burden, and I struggled with whether to act on it. Eerie feeling of knowing too much weighed on me, and I began to question my frequent visits to the Midnight Library. As my obsession with the library grew, I started to lose touch with reality. The boundaries between the world inside the books and my own life became increasingly blurred. Friends and family noticed my distraction, and I found it difficult to explain the allure of the Midnight Library. The magical encounters were addictive, but the haunting sense of being trapped in a web of enchantment, ever present. I had to find a way out before it consumed me. One evening, Greta handed me a final book, urging me to read it carefully. As I opened it, the pages revealed the story of my own life, including my encounters with the Midnight Library. Chilling realization that the library had been guiding my path all along was overwhelming. The book ended with a choice: to stay in the library forever or to leave and never return. The decision weighed heavily on me, each option filled with uncertainty. In the end, I chose to leave. The library's magic was enticing. The cost was too high. As I stepped out into the stormy night, the door to the Midnight Library closed behind me with a final, echoing thud. The eerie silence was replaced by the sound of rain and thunder. The world outside felt both familiar and strange, and I knew my life would never be the same. The haunting memories of the library lingered, a reminder of the magical journey I had undertaken. Years later, the memory of the Midnight Library still sends shivers down my spine. The books, the magical experiences, and the chilling choice I had to make are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear and wonder it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the power of curiosity and the chilling reality that some secrets are best left undiscovered. The Midnight Library, with its magical allure, will always be a haunting chapter of my life. It was a crisp autumn weekend when my best friend Tim and I decided to go camping in the woods near our hometown. At 12 years old, we were eager for adventure and the thrill of spending a night under the stars. The woods were beautiful, the leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold. We set up our tent, built a fire, and spent the evening roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. The atmosphere was perfect, until it wasn't. As the fire began to die down, we heard a rustling noise from the bushes. At first we thought it was just a raccoon or maybe a deer, but then the rustling grew louder and more deliberate. We shone our flashlights towards the sound, and saw something that made our blood run cold. Emerging from the darkness was a deer. Something was terribly wrong. The deer had no legs. It seemed to float or glide across the ground in an unnatural, eerie manner. Tim and I froze, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. The legless deer moved towards us with an eerie grace, its eyes glowing in the beam of our flashlights. It made no sound, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the fear rising. I glanced at Tim, who was just as pale and wide-eyed as I was. Suddenly, the deer let out a chilling, almost human-like scream. That broke the spell. We scrambled to our feet, grabbing our gear and dousing the fire as quickly as possible. The legless deer continued to glide closer, its eyes never leaving us. We bolted towards the trail that led back to our homes, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, had turned into a nightmarish maze. Every shadow seemed to conceal another horror. We ran until we could no longer hear the deer's haunting scream. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, we realized we had dropped our map and some of our supplies in our frantic escape. Fear of getting lost was almost as overwhelming as the memory of the legless deer. We decided to keep moving, hoping to find the main trail before exhaustion set in. The eerie silence of the forest was broken only by our footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. After what felt like hours, we found the trail and followed it back to the edge of the woods. The relief of seeing the familiar path was immense. Fear lingered. We reached Tim's house and burst through the door, breathless and shaken. His parents looked at us in alarm, and we spilled out our story in a jumble of words. They listened, their expressions shifting from concern to disbelief, but the terror in our eyes convinced them that we had experienced something truly chilling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the legless deer gliding towards us, its haunting eyes piercing the darkness. The fear was suffocating, and I kept the light on, hoping it would keep the nightmares at bay. The next morning, Tim and I met up to talk about what had happened. We were both still shaken, but we needed to make sense of the experience. We decided to research any local legends or stories about strange creatures in the woods. Our search led us to an old man named Mr. Jenkins, who was known for his knowledge of local folklore. When we told him our story, his eyes widened, and he nodded gravely. He spoke of an ancient curse that supposedly haunted the woods, a spirit that took the form of a legless deer to warn trespassers. The tale was both fascinating and terrifying, adding a layer of mystery to our encounter. Memory of the deer's scream still sent shivers down my spine. As time passed, we tried to put the experience behind us, but the haunting memory lingered. The woods, once our playground, had become a place of fear and uncertainty. We avoided camping trips and stuck to safer, more familiar adventures. The legless deer had left an indelible mark on our childhood, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the edge of our understanding. It was a story we shared with caution, knowing the fear it could evoke. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The legless deer, haunting scream, and the eerie silence of the forest are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The woods, once a place of wonder, become a haunting chapter of my childhood. Growing up, I spent many summers at my grandparents' ranch in Arizona. The wide open spaces and rugged beauty of the desert were both captivating and comforting. One summer, however, the tranquility of the ranch was shattered by an experience that still haunts me to this day. I was 12, and the events that unfolded left an indelible mark on my memory. It all started with strange noises at night. I often heard whispers carried on the wind, voices that seemed to call my name. At first, I dismissed them as my imagination, or the sounds of animals in the distance. But the whispers grew louder and more persistent, making it impossible to ignore. One night, I decided to investigate, determined to find the source of the eerie sounds. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the cool desert night. The ranch was cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the full moon overhead. As I walked towards the edge of the property, the whispers seemed to grow louder, surrounding me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pressed on. Suddenly, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning the flashlight in that direction, I saw a figure standing by the old corral. It was tall and thin, with eyes that glowed in the beam of light. Fear gripped me as I realized the figure was not human. It moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding across the ground. The whispers grew more intense, and I could feel a chilling presence in the air. Figure called my name, voice both familiar and strange. It was then that I remembered the stories my grandparents had told me about skinwalkers, shape-shifting witches that could take on the form of animals or people. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I turned and ran back to the house, the figure's haunting voice echoing in my ears. My grandparents were waiting for me, their faces filled with concern. They had heard the whispers too, and knew what I had encountered. My grandfather grabbed his rifle and went outside to investigate, while my grandmother pulled me close, whispering prayers of protection. Fear in her eyes was palpable, and I knew this was more than just a ghost story. That night, sleep was impossible. The whispers continued, and I could feel the skinwalker's presence lurking just outside the house. My grandparents stayed up with me, their protective presence a small comfort against the overwhelming fear. The next day, my grandfather performed a cleansing ritual, hoping to rid the ranch of the skinwalker's influence. The air felt lighter afterward, but the memory of the encounter lingered. In the days that followed, I avoided the edge of the property and stayed close to the house. The fear of seeing the skinwalker again was too great. My grandparents told me more about the legends, explaining that skinwalkers were powerful and dangerous beings. They advised me to always be cautious and to respect the land and its spirits. The experience had opened my eyes to a world I had never fully understood. As the summer came to an end, the whispers gradually faded, and the skinwalker's presence seemed to dissipate. But the memory of that night stayed with me. Fear and unease I felt were unlike anything I had experienced before. The desert, once a place of beauty and adventure, had taken on a more sinister aspect. Stories my grandparents had told me were no longer just tales. They were real, and the skinwalker was proof of that. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The skinwalker, with its glowing eyes and haunting voice, is etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the power of ancient legends and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The desert, with its rugged beauty and hidden dangers, will always be a place of both wonder and fear for me. You ever been out in the Yukon? Picture this. Dense forests, shadows lurking everywhere. So there I was, 14 years old and convinced I was ready for the world. Our camp was miles from civilization, surrounded by towering pines. One night, while the others slept, I heard it, a whispering voice. It was chilling, not just because it was unexpected, but because it sounded like my deceased mother calling my name. I couldn't ignore it. My heart pounded as I followed the voice into the woods, every step accompanied by the eerie rustling of leaves. The moon cast long shadows, turning familiar shapes into monstrous figures. As I ventured deeper, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. My breath fogged in the cold air, mingling with the ghostly voices that seemed to come from all directions. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. Tall, frail figure with glowing eyes. It stood motionless, its eyes piercing through the darkness. I froze, too scared to move. The figure seemed almost skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long. I felt my blood run cold, my legs refusing to obey my desperate desire to flee. The spirit, or whatever it was, moved closer. I could see its face now, hollow and haunting. It reached out a hand, and for a moment I thought it might touch me. But instead, it pointed deeper into the forest. Despite the fear, I felt compelled to follow, as if under a spell. Further I went, the stronger the whispers became. Now almost a chorus of chilling voices. Suddenly the spirit vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. The silence was deafening, broken only by my ragged breaths. I looked around, disoriented and scared. Panic started to set in when I realized I was lost. But then, just as quickly as it had disappeared, the spirit reappeared, glowing eyes leading me back. When I finally stumbled back into the camp, dawn was breaking. My friends were still asleep, oblivious to my ordeal. I collapsed into my sleeping bag, trembling. The whispers had stopped, but their haunting echo remained. I didn't speak of it to anyone, fearing they wouldn't believe me. But I knew what I had seen. In the light of day, the forest seemed less intimidating, almost peaceful. But the memory of that night stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in the shadows. I never went back to that camp, but the experience changed me, taught me that some spirits don't rest easily, and that the past can reach out to touch the living. Years later, I still think about that night. The spirit's message, whatever it was, remains a mystery. But I learned to respect the unknown, to listen to the whispers of the past. The Yukon, with its eerie beauty, holds a piece of my heart and a part of my fear. Now, whenever I hear a whisper in the wind, I remember the glowing eyes and the chilling silence of the Yukon night. The haunting memory, but one that reminds me of the thin veil between our world and the next. So next time you're out in the woods, listen closely. You never know what you might hear. Camping in the San Rafael Desert seemed like an adventure at first. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, but things took a chilling turn one night. I was just a kid, barely 12, trying to find solace away from the turmoil at home. My mother's boyfriend was there, and he was not the kind you'd want to be around. One night, his threats became too much, and I ran. The desert at night is eerily quiet. My footsteps echoed, and the vast emptiness seemed to swallow me whole. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. Suddenly, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Upright walking coyotes. They moved with an unnatural grace, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. Were they werewolves? I wasn't sure, but they felt otherworldly. Terrified, I stumbled and fell. The creatures circled around me, their presence both menacing and strangely protective. One stepped forward, its gaze piercing through the darkness. I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. The pack began to move, and I followed, feeling safer with them than I ever did at the campsite. We traveled through the desert, their movements swift and silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were leading me somewhere. The night was cold, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of sand under our feet and the occasional haunting howl. It felt like a dream, yet everything was too vivid to be anything but real. After what felt like hours, we reached a rocky outcrop. The werewolves, or whatever they were, stopped and looked at me. One nudged me gently towards a narrow path. As I followed it, I saw lights in the distance. Relief washed over me. It was another campsite. I turned to thank my eerie guides, but they were already gone, melted back into the shadows. I approached the new campsite cautiously. People there were kind, offering me food and warmth. I told them my story, and they listened with a mix of disbelief and concern. One of them, an old man with knowing eyes, said the desert was full of mysteries. He said sometimes the spirits guide us in the strangest forms. The next morning, we found my mother's campsite. She was frantic with worry, her boyfriend subdued. I never told her about the werewolves, only that I got lost and found my way back thanks to some strangers. The experience stayed with me, haunting reminder of the desert's secrets and the chilling forms they might take. Years later, I often think about that night. The desert still calls to me with its eerie beauty and haunting silence. I've come to believe that those creatures, whatever they were guardians of a sort, protecting me from a danger I couldn't face alone. The desert remains a place of mystery, where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. Every time I see the moonlight casting long shadows, I remember those glowing eyes and the sense of calm they brought. The desert taught me that sometimes our saviors come in the most unexpected forms. The lesson I carry with me, a chilling yet comforting memory of the night the werewolves of the San Rafael Desert led me to safety. It was my first solo camping trip, and I chose Algonquin Park for its breathtaking beauty. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of nature. On my second night, as darkness fell, I realized my flashlight was missing. I ventured out to find it, hoping it had just fallen out of my pack. The forest at night was eerily silent, the trees casting haunting shadows in the moonlight. As I searched, I heard a faint rustling ahead. My heart pounded as I crept closer. There, in the dim light, I saw a large, skeletal, wolf-like creature. It stood on its hind legs, holding my lost flashlight in its bony grasp. My breath caught in my throat. The creature's eyes glowed with an unsettling light, and a chilling whisper filled the air around me. Frozen with fear, I watched as dark shapes emerged from the shadows, circling me. The whispers grew louder, more menacing. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet their tone was unmistakably threatening. My legs trembled, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The eerie figures closed in, their voices echoing in my mind. Suddenly, the skeletal creature dropped the flashlight and lunged at me. I stumbled backward, my hand fumbling to grab the light. The whispers became a deafening roar, and my vision blurred. Panic surged through me as I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, and I fell, my head striking a rock. When I came to, the forest was silent again, the creatures gone. My flashlight lay beside me, its beam casting a weak light on the surrounding trees. I scrambled to my feet, every nerve on edge. The whispers had stopped, but their haunting echo lingered in my mind. I grabbed the flashlight and stumbled back to my campsite. Heart racing. Back in the relative safety of my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide some unseen horror. Sleep was impossible. I lay there, eyes wide open, replaying the night's events over and over in my mind. The skeletal creature and its dark companions haunted my thoughts. Morning brought little relief. Forest seemed less menacing in the daylight, but the memory of the night's terror remained. I packed up my gear, eager to leave Algonquin Park behind. As I hiked back to the trailhead, couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. Years have passed since that haunting night in Algonquin Park, but the memory remains vivid. I've been on many camping trips since, none as chilling as that one. Park, with its eerie beauty, holds a piece of my past, a reminder of the thin veil between the natural and the supernatural. It's a story I rarely share, but one that's shaped my view of the world. Now, whenever I find myself alone in the wilderness, I listen closely. The whispers of Algonquin Park taught me to respect the unknown and to be wary of the shadows. The forest is full of mystery, and some are best left undisturbed. So if you ever find yourself in Algonquin Park at night, keep your flashlight close and your senses sharper. Camping in the Scottish Highlands sounded like a grand adventure. My friends and I were eager to explore the rugged beauty of the landscape. We set up camp near a secluded glen, surrounded by ancient trees and rolling hills. The first few nights were peaceful, filled with laughter and stories around the campfire. But on the third night, everything changed. It was late, and a full moon cast an eerie glow over the campsite. We were settling in when we heard a chilling howl in the distance. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, deep, haunting, and primal. My friends laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I decided to take a walk to clear my head, despite the uneasy atmosphere. As I wandered through the forest, the howls grew louder. Suddenly, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A massive, wolf-like creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a menacing light. Before I could react, it lunged at me, sinking its teeth into my arm. The pain was excruciating, and I screamed, but the creature disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I stumbled back to the campsite, clutching my bleeding arm. My friends were shocked and horrified when they saw the bite marks. They quickly bandaged my wound, but there was an eerie silence that settled over us. We decided to leave the next morning, but the night was far from over. As the moon rose higher, I began to feel strange, feverish, and restless. I tried to sleep, but my body felt like it was on fire. My skin itched and my muscles ached. I tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares of the wolf-like creature. When I finally drifted off, it was only to wake up with a start, feeling more like an animal than a human. My senses were heightened, and I could hear the rustling of leaves and the distant howls with terrifying clarity. Over the next few days, the changes became more pronounced. My eyes seemed to glow in the dark, and my teeth felt sharper. I avoided my friends, terrified of what I was becoming. The nights were the worst, filled with uncontrollable urges and violent dreams. I knew I had to isolate myself to protect them and anyone else I might encounter. I found a remote cave deep in the forest and made it my refuge. There I could endure the transformations in solitude. Pain was unbearable, but the fear of hurting someone was worse. I lost track of time, the days blending into nights as I fought to retain my humanity. The howls of the other wolves seemed to call to me, a chilling reminder of what I was becoming. Months passed, and I learned to control the transformations better. The fear never left me. I became a shadow of my former self, living in constant vigilance. The Scottish Highlands, once a place of adventure, become a prison. I rarely ventured out, only when necessary, always wary of the full moon and its haunting power over me. My friends eventually returned to search for me, but I stayed hidden. I couldn't let them see what I had become. The pain of isolation was immense, but it was a necessary sacrifice. The werewolf attack had changed me forever, and I had to protect those I cared about from the beast within. Even now, years later, the memory of that night in the Highlands haunts me. The bite of the werewolf left more than physical scars, left a mark on my soul. The Scottish wilderness is both beautiful and terrifying, a place where legends come to life. If you ever camp there, beware the full moon and the chilling howls that echo through the night. Camping in an isolated area can be a double-edged sword. The serenity is unmatched, but the unexpected can be downright chilling. One night, my friends and I experienced this firsthand. We had set up our tents in a remote spot, far from any human activity. The night was still, with only the sounds of nature to accompany us as we settled in around the campfire. Around midnight, we heard a strange noise. It was a low, menacing grunt that sent shivers down our spine. At first, we thought it was just our imaginations running wild. But then, the grunts grew louder, closer. We grabbed our flashlights and peered into the darkness. There, standing not far from our campsite, was a massive bull. Its eyes glinted in the beam of our lights, and it looked furious. Panic set in as the bull began to paw at the ground, its massive hooves kicking up dust. We had no idea where it had come from or why it was so agitated, but we knew we had to keep our distance. We retreated to our tents, hoping the thin fabric would somehow protect us. The bull snorted and circled our campsite, its presence a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we were. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every time the bull moved, we held our breath, praying it would leave us alone. At one point, it came so close that we could hear its heavy breathing and the thud of its hooves. We stayed as still as possible, hearts pounding in our chests. Eventually, the grunting and stomping stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the campsite. Morning brought a sense of relief. The tension still lingered. We cautiously emerged from our tents, scanning the area for any sign of the bull. It was gone, but it had left a clear reminder of its visit, a single, large hoofprint right next to one of our tents. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. We had been so close to danger without even realizing it. We decided to pack up and leave as quickly as possible. The serene beauty of our campsite had turned sinister overnight, and none of us wanted to stick around for another encounter. As we hiked back to civilization, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs made us jumpy and paranoid. The experience left a lasting impression on all of us. We had come face to face with nature's unpredictability and survived, but it had been a close call. I still think about that night whenever I go camping, always keeping a wary eye out for any unexpected visitor. The haunting presence of that bull is a reminder that the wilderness holds many secrets and surprises. Even now, the memory of that night feels surreal. It was a stark lesson in respect for nature and its inhabitant. The bull had been a chilling intruder in our peaceful camp, a reminder that we were mere guests in its territory. Taught us to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings, and always prepared for the unexpected. So if you ever find yourself camping in an isolated area, remember our encounter. Keep your eyes and ears open, and never underestimate the creatures that might share the night with you. The wilderness is a place of beauty and wonder, but it also has its dangers. Respect it, and you'll have stories to tell, just like mine. Camping in the Australian outback is a test of nerves and survival skills. My stepfather and I decided to camp in a remote area called King's Junction, far from any signs of civilization. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, with vast stretches of wilderness and an eerie silence that seemed to envelop everything. We set up our camp near a small creek, hoping for a peaceful night under the stars. As darkness fell, the outback transformed into a haunting, otherworldly place. The moon cast long, eerie shadows, and the only sounds were the distant calls of nocturnal animals. We sat by the campfire, enjoying the serenity, when we heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakably human. It was calling for help, but the tone was off, almost mechanical. My stepfather and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of it. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the darkness, following the voice. The calls grew louder, more urgent, leading us deeper into the bush. Suddenly, we saw it. A skeletal creature, hunched over and mimicking human voices. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its long, bony fingers clawed at the ground. We froze, the chilling sight sending shivers down our spines. The creature began to move towards us, its movements jerky and unnatural. Panic set in, and we turned to run. The creature followed, its haunting calls echoing through the night. We stumbled through the bush, branches scratching at our skin, trying to put as much distance between us and the creature as possible. The outback, once serene, had become a terrifying maze of shadows and noises. Breathless and scared, we finally reached our campsite. The creature's calls had faded, but the fear lingered. We hurriedly packed our gear, hands shaking. The thought of spending another moment in that place was unbearable. As we were about to leave, we heard the voice again, closer this time. It was mimicking my stepfather's voice, calling my name. I felt a chill run down my spine. We jumped into the car and sped away, the haunting calls fading into the distance. The drive back to civilization was tense, neither of us speaking. The encounter had shaken us to our core. We reached a small town at dawn and checked into a motel, desperate for safety and rest. The outback, with its eerie beauty, had shown us its darker side. Days later, the memory of that night still haunted us. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, but nothing made sense. The creature's mimicry and its skeletal form were unlike anything we had ever encountered. Felt like a warning, a reminder of how little we understood about the wilderness and its secrets. I've since returned to the outback, but never to King's Junction. The fear of encountering that creature again is too great. The experience taught me to respect the unknown and to be wary of the places where human presence is scarce. The outback is a land of mysteries, and some are best left undiscovered. Even now, the thought of that night sends a shiver down my spine. The creature's haunting calls and skeletal form are etched in my memory. It's a chilling reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown. Though, if you ever venture into the Australian outback, remember our story and tread carefully. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. Living in a small Romanian village has its share of charms and mysteries. The ancient forests that surround our home are filled with tales of spirits and folklore. One evening, an elderly woman from our village had a visit that would turn these stories into a chilling reality. It all began when she hosted a mysterious guest, a stranger with piercing eyes and an eerie presence. The guest arrived unannounced, seeking shelter for the night. The old woman, known for her kindness, welcomed him into her home. They shared a meal, and the stranger spoke of distant lands and strange customs. As the night grew darker, the atmosphere turned eerie. The guest's voice seemed to change, taking on a haunting tone. He looked into the old woman's eyes and uttered a curse, something about her cow. The next morning, the woman went to milk her cow, only to find a horrifying sight. Instead of milk, blood flowed from the cow's udders. Panic set in, and she rushed back to the village to seek help. The news spread quickly, and soon the villagers gathered, whispering about dark magic and ancient curses. The cow's condition was unlike anything they had ever seen, and fear gripped their hearts. Desperate for answers, the old woman sought the guidance of the village's wise elder. He listened to her story and nodded solemnly. "There is a witch in the forest," he said, "and she is not pleased." The villagers decided to confront the source of their fear. Armed with torches and a mix of hope and dread, they ventured into the ancient woods, following the elder's lead. The forest was dense, and the night was filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant howls. As they delved deeper, the air grew colder, and an eerie fog began to envelop them. Suddenly, they saw her, the witch, standing in a clearing, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. She was surrounded by shadowy figures, spirits of the forest that seemed to obey her every command. The villagers confronted the witch, pleading for her to lift the curse. She laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the trees. The spirits whispered ominous warnings, and the villagers felt a wave of fear wash over them. The witch raised her hand, and the shadows seemed to close in. Just when all hope seemed lost, the elder stepped forward, invoking an ancient chant. The words he spoke were powerful, filled with the wisdom of generation. The witch's laughter turned to a scream, and the spirits recoiled. Fog lifted, and the cold air began to warm. The curse was broken, and the shadows dispersed. The villagers watched in awe as the witch vanished into the night, leaving behind only the echo of her haunting presence. The old woman returned home, relieved to find her cow miraculously healed. Blood was gone, replaced by fresh, pure milk. The village celebrated their victory, but the memory of that night remained a chilling reminder of the forest's dark secret. Ancient woods, with their eerie beauty, held more than just trees and wildlife. They were a gateway to the unknown. Even now, villagers speak of that night in hushed tone. Forest spirits are not to be trifled with, and the witch's curse is a lesson in respect, the unseen. The old woman never forgot the stranger who brought such fear into her home, and she became more cautious of those who sought her kindness. The village, too, learned to tread carefully, always aware of the thin line between the natural and the supernatural. So, if you ever find yourself in a Romanian village, remember this tale. Forest holds many secrets, and some are best left undisturbed. Listen to the whispers of the trees, and respect the spirits that dwell within. For in the heart of the ancient woods, the past and present intertwine in chilling harmony, and the line between reality and legend blurs. It all started on a crisp autumn afternoon in Pennsylvania. My buddy Jake and I, both mechanics by trade, decided to explore an unfamiliar part of the woods after hearing about its eerie reputation. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that made the forest seem alive. We joked about finding Bigfoot, but there was a chill in the air that hinted at something more sinister. Little did we know, our playful banter would soon turn into a haunting experience. As we ventured deeper into the woods, trees grew denser and the path less distinct. The sounds of the forest were all around us, the rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, and our own footsteps crunching on the underbrush. Suddenly, Jake stopped dead in his tracks and pointed ahead. Through the trees we saw a figure standing still, almost blending into the shadows. My heart raced as we cautiously approached. The figure remained motionless as we got closer. It was a man dressed in ragged clothes, his face obscured by a hood. Jake called out to him, but there was no response. We exchanged uneasy glances and debated whether to turn back or investigate further. Curiosity got the better of us, and we inched closer until we could see his eyes. They were wide open and vacant, staring right through us. Suddenly, he moved with an eerie slowness that sent shivers down my spine. He raised a bony finger and pointed deeper into the woods. Without a word, he turned and vanished into the trees, leaving us in stunned silence. Jake and I exchanged looks of disbelief, but decided to follow the direction he had pointed. Something about his silent message compelled us to keep going. We walked for what felt like hours, forest growing darker and more oppressive with each step. Just as we were about to give up and head back, we stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was a makeshift grave marked by a crude wooden cross. My breath caught in my throat as we realized the grave looked freshly dug. The air around us felt charged with an eerie energy. Jake suggested we dig to see what was inside, but I hesitated. The thought of disturbing a grave sent chills down my spine. But Jake was already at work, using a stick to start digging. As the soil was moved, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. We uncovered a small wooden box, and my hands trembled as we opened it. Inside the box were tattered pieces of clothing and a photograph. The picture was old and faded, showing a family standing in front of a house. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized the man in the photo as the same figure we had seen in the woods. It was then that we heard a rustling behind us. Turning around, we saw the same man standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us. His presence was both chilling and haunting. He slowly approached, and we backed away, fear gripping our hearts. As he reached the grave, he knelt down and placed a hand on the wooden cross. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Without looking up, he began to speak in a low, mournful voice. He told us a story of loss and sorrow, of a family torn apart by tragedy. His wife and child had perished in a fire, and he had buried their remains here, far from the world that had taken them from him. His spirit had been bound to this place, unable to move on. The grief in his voice was palpable, and tears welled up in my eyes. As he finished his tale, he stood up and looked at us with a sad smile. He thanked us for listening and for uncovering the truth. Slowly, he began to fade away, his form dissolving into the mist. Jake and I stood there in stunned silence, the weight of his story heavy on our hearts. We knew we had to leave, but the experience would stay with us forever. We left the woods in a daze, the haunting encounter replaying in our mind. The photograph and the makeshift grave were a testament to the man's sorrow and the eerie events we had witnessed. It was a chilling reminder of the past that still lingered in those woods, a tale we would never forget. Our school camping trip to Algonquin Provincial Park was supposed to be an adventure, a break from the monotony of classrooms and textbooks. I was excited, imagining days filled with hiking, swimming, and stories around the campfire. The first day went as planned, with everyone enjoying the fresh air and freedom. But as night fell, an eerie feeling settled over the camp. The teachers told us about a hermit rumored to live deep in the woods, a man who had shunned society years ago. Later that night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, the thought of the hermit wouldn't leave my mind. The idea of someone living out there, alone in the dark woods, sent chills down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but every rustle of the trees outside made me more anxious. I told myself it was just a story to spook us, but the forest outside our cabin felt different, almost alive with an eerie presence. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, were crunching the leaves outside. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen with fear. I dared not move, barely breathing, straining to hear any other sound. The footsteps stopped right outside the cabin, and I could hear the faint rustle of clothes. It felt like an eternity before they moved away. The next morning, I shared my experience with a few friends. They laughed it off, saying it was probably a deer or another camper playing a prank. I wanted to believe them, but the memory of those footsteps was too vivid, too real. As we went about our activities, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed darker, more oppressive, as if it held secrets it didn't want to reveal. That night, the teachers decided to take us on a night hike, tradition to build courage and camaraderie. We gathered our flashlights and set off into the woods, the path illuminated by bobbing lights and muffled whispers. The deeper we went, the more I felt the forest closing in on us. Suddenly, we heard a branch snap nearby, and everyone fell silent. The teachers tried to reassure us, but their voices were tinged with uncertainty. As we continued, I found myself at the back of the group, my flashlight flickering. The woods around us were a black wall, and every sound seemed amplified. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the trees, too quick and too human to be an animal. I stumbled, my heart racing, and the flashlight slipped from my hand. In the chaos of retrieving it, I lost sight of the group. Panic set in as I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the woods. I fumbled with the flashlight, my hands shaking, and when it finally flickered back to life, I saw him. The hermit stood a few feet away, his eyes reflecting the light in an unsettling way. He was gaunt, clothes tattered, and he watched me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. My mind raced with the stories I had heard, wondering if he was dangerous or just lonely. Suddenly, he raised a hand, and I froze, pointed in the direction of the camp, a silent gesture that seemed to urge me to leave. Without another thought, I turned and ran, branches whipping my face and adrenaline coursing through my veins. I burst into the clearing where the camp was set up, breathless and terrified. The teachers and my friends surrounded me, asking what had happened. Between gasps, I told them about the hermit, how I had seen him, and how he had silently told me to leave. Their faces paled, and we all huddled closer to the campfire, the sense of safety it provided feeling fragile and temporary. That night, sleep was impossible. Every noise made me jump, and the image of the hermit's haunting eyes stayed with me. The trip ended the next day, and as we boarded the bus to leave, took one last look at the woods. They seemed to hold a dark secret, one I was more than happy to leave behind. The story of the hermit would become just that, story. The chilling encounter would stay with me forever. The memory of that night has never faded. Whenever I think about camping or hiking, I remember the haunting silence of the woods and the mysterious figure that watched us. It's a tale I've told many times, each retelling sending shivers down the spines of those who listen. Algonquin Provincial Park remains a beautiful place, but to me, it will always hold a sense of eerie mystery. It started with an odd feeling of being watched, but I shrugged it off as a figment of my imagination. Then, as the days went by, I began to see shadowy figures darting out of the corners of my eyes. They never fully materialized, but their fleeting presence left a chilling impact. The feeling of dread that accompanied these sightings was palpable, growing more intense each time. One evening, after a long day, I settled into my living room with a book. The house was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the pages. Suddenly, I saw a shadow move across the wall, something so dark and distinct that it defied explanation. My heart raced, and I turned quickly, only to find nothing out of the ordinary. The eerie feeling, however, lingered long after. The encounters with these shadowy figures became more frequent and unsettling. They would appear in various shapes and sizes, often just out of clear view, creating a constant sense of unease. The shadows seemed to have a life of their own, shifting and moving with a sinister intent. The more I saw them, the more I felt like they were trying to communicate something, but their message remained obscured in darkness. One particularly terrifying night, as I was getting ready for bed, a figure emerged clearly in the doorway of my bedroom. It was tall and shadowy, with an almost human shape, but lacking any discernible features. The figure stood still for a moment before vanishing into thin air, leaving me paralyzed with fear. I tried to rationalize it as a trick of the light or fatigue, but deep down, I knew there was something more sinister at play. As time passed, the shadowy figures began to interact with my environment in disturbing ways. Objects would move on their own, and I'd hear whispers that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. The whispers were unintelligible, but filled with a malevolent tone that made my skin crawl. It was as if the shadows were trying to exert their influence over my home, making their presence known in increasingly unsettling ways. I sought help from friends and experts, hoping to find a solution, or at least some peace of mind. Some suggested that the shadows could be manifestations of unresolved energy or spirits. Others believed they were simply figments of an overactive imagination. Regardless of the explanations, the presence of these figures was undeniable, and they continued to haunt my daily life. One evening, as I was walking through the house, I felt a cold draft and saw a shadowy figure following me. It was a deeply unsettling experience, as if I was being shadowed by something that meant me harm. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding, but the shadow kept pace with me, vanishing only when I reached the safety of a well-lit room. Despite my efforts to ignore them, the shadowy figures became an ever-present part of my life. They seemed to have an almost eerie intelligence, as if they were observing and reacting to my every move. The fear they instilled became a constant companion, lurking in the back of my mind, even when they weren't directly visible. I began to notice that these encounters were more intense during times of stress or emotional upheaval. It was as if the shadowy figures were feeding off my fear and anxiety, growing stronger with each encounter. The once mundane corners of my home now felt like dark realms where the unknown lurked, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. In the end, I learned to coexist with these shadowy figures, accepting their presence as a part of my reality. The haunting feeling of being watched never fully disappeared, but I found ways to manage the fear they brought. The shadows remained a chilling reminder of the unknown and ever-present darkness that I had come to accept as a part of my life. It was a quiet afternoon when I first noticed something odd in my window. I was alone at home, engrossed in a book, when a shadowy figure appeared outside. It was a fleeting glimpse, but the figure seemed to be peering in with an unsettling intensity. My heart skipped a beat, but I brushed it off as a trick of the light, or perhaps a neighbor passing by. Later that evening, as the sun set and shadows grew long, the figure appeared again. This time, it was more distinct, a dark, almost human silhouette that moved with a deliberate slowness. My curiosity turned to apprehension as the figure's gaze seemed fixed on me. I tried to see through the window, but there was nothing there. The eerie feeling persisted, as if the figure had left a lingering chill in the room. Over the next few nights, the creepy encounters became more frequent and disturbing. I'd hear soft whispers coming from outside my window, faint but unmistakable. They were eerie and insidious, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand, but that carried an unmistakable tone of menace. I'd open the curtains to find nothing, but the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. One particularly unsettling night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw the figure again, now standing closer to the window. The whispers grew more distinct, coalescing into a chilling message. "I know you can hear me." The voice was low and guttural, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, realizing that the figure's presence was more than a figment of my imagination. Desperate for answers, I spoke to friends and even consulted with a paranormal expert. They suggested that the figure might be a manifestation of negative energy or a spirit trying to make contact. The idea of a malevolent entity lurking outside my home was chilling, but I couldn't deny the fear that gripped me every time the figure appeared. The encounters grew more personal as the figure began to appear inside my home. It would manifest as a dark shape in the corners of rooms or as a fleeting shadow on the walls. Each appearance was accompanied by a growing sense of dread, as if the figure was slowly encroaching upon my personal space. The once safe haven of my home now felt like a stage for something sinister. One evening, I decided to confront the figure. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I approached the window. The figure had vanished. The whispers had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound and shadow, convinced that the figure was simply waiting for the right moment to return. As time went on, the encounters became less frequent, but the fear remained. I found myself constantly on edge, anticipating the next appearance of the figure. The whispers had stopped, but the unsettling presence of the shadowy figure had left an indelible mark on my psyche. It was as if the entity had claimed a part of my life, haunting me with its chilling message. I began to notice a pattern in the encounters, often occurring during times of high stress or emotional turmoil. It was as if the figure thrived on my fear, beating off my anxiety and using it to become more intrusive. The realization that my own emotions might be amplifying the presence of this eerie entity was both unsettling and fascinating. In the end, I learned to adapt to the eerie presence of the figure. While the encounters had become less frequent, they had left a lasting impression on me. I continued to live in my home, but the whispers and shadowy figure had transformed the space into a place of constant vigilance. The haunting presence remained a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that can slip into our lives, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. It was a crisp fall day when I first set foot in the old elder care facility. I'd heard rumors about its haunted past, but the chilling stories never prepared me for the eerie atmosphere that greeted me. The building was a grand but decaying structure, its corridors filled with a haunting silence that seemed to whisper of bygone days and untold stories. As I wandered through the dimly lit halls, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The creaking floors and the occasional cold draft added to the unsettling ambiance. It wasn't long before I encountered the first ghostly apparition, a shadowy figure that appeared briefly in the hallway before vanishing. The encounter was brief but left a lingering chill in the air. My curiosity led me to a small, forgotten room tucked away behind a heavy, dust-covered door. Inside, the room was filled with old, forgotten belongings and a sense of melancholy. There was a particularly unsettling painting of a young woman, her eyes seeming to follow me wherever I went. The painting exuded a sadness that felt almost palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's sorrow was tied to the facility's tragic past. The next location on my list was a historic hotel in Venice, known for its tragic history involving a young man who had met a grisly end. The hotel, though beautiful, was cloaked in an eerie atmosphere. As I explored, I encountered strange occurrences, items moving on their own and cold spots that seemed to linger. Each moment seemed to echo with the presence of the young man's restless spirit. The most unsettling experience occurred in one of the hotel's old rooms, where I felt a sudden, oppressive heaviness. It was as if the room itself was trying to communicate the pain and despair of its past. I found myself inexplicably drawn to a particular corner, where I saw a shadowy figure that seemed to embody the tragic energy of the place. The encounter was brief, but left me with a profound sense of unease. The final stop on my haunted journey was a house with a deeply tragic history involving a young man's suicide. The house, once filled with laughter and joy, now stood as a silent testament to the past. The air was thick with a sense of loss and sorrow, and the haunting presence of the young man was unmistakable. I felt his sadness pervade every room, as if the walls themselves held the echoes of his final moments. During my visit, I experienced several ghostly encounters. Doors would creak open on their own, and unexplained cold drafts would sweep through the rooms. The most chilling experience occurred one night when I heard footsteps echoing through the house, despite being alone. Footsteps grew louder and more insistent, culminating in a hauntingly familiar figure appearing in the hallway. As the days went by, I found myself increasingly fascinated by the haunting presence of the locations I visited. Each place seemed to have its own unique energy, a blend of past sorrow and lingering spirits. The stories of the past became more vivid, and the ghostly encounters more frequent, painting a picture of a world where the past never truly fades away. My experiences in these haunted locations left me with a deep appreciation for the eerie and tragic tales that linger in these spaces. The encounters with restless spirits and the echoes of bygone tragedies painted a vivid picture of the supernatural forces that can haunt our world. Chilling presence of the past remains a haunting reminder of the stories that linger just beyond our understanding. In the end, these haunted locations taught me the past is never truly gone. The echoes of history and the spirits that linger serve as a testament to the profound impact past events can have on our present. The chilling experiences and ghostly encounters have left an indelible mark on my understanding of the supernatural. I'll never forget the night I experienced one of the most terrifying moments of my life. It all began with a seemingly ordinary evening at home, when strange things started happening. At first, it was just small, unsettling noises, things shifting around in the dark. But as the night progressed, eerie disturbances grew louder and more menacing. The chilling realization hit me when the noises began to form distinct pattern. Footsteps echoed in the empty rooms, but when I checked, there was never anyone there. The sounds seemed to come from different parts of the house, moving in ways that defied logic. Each new sound added to the mounting sense of dread that had settled over me. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or the wind. The fear was palpable. The noises grew more frequent and intense, each one more unsettling than the last. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by something unseen. It was a haunting experience that left me feeling trapped in my own home. One particularly terrifying moment occurred when I saw a shadowy figure dart past a window. The figure was indistinct and fleeting, but it was enough to make my heart race. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or make sense of what I had just witnessed. The shadowy figure seemed to embody the terror that had been building inside me. The next few nights were filled with similar unsettling experiences. The noises continued, becoming more aggressive and invasive. Objects in the house would move on their own, and doors would slam shut with no apparent cause. The sense of dread was almost overwhelming, and the feeling that something malevolent was lurking in the shadows was ever present. In an attempt to find answers, I sought the help of paranormal investigators. They conducted a thorough examination of the house, but their findings were inconclusive. They reported nothing out of the ordinary, which only added to the sense of isolation and fear I was experiencing. It was as if the terror was uniquely tailored to me, leaving me with no clear explanation or relief. As the days turned into weeks, terrifying experiences became a part of my daily life. The once familiar and comforting spaces of my home were now sources of constant fear and anxiety. The shadows seemed to grow more menacing and the noises more insistent, as if they were taunting me with their presence. Despite the fear and the constant anxiety, I began to adapt to the strange occurrences. I learned to live with the unsettling noises and the shadowy figures, trying to find solace in the routines of daily life. The terror that once gripped me began to fade, replaced by a resigned acceptance of the supernatural forces at play. Reflecting on these experiences, I realized that they had profoundly changed me. The encounters with the unknown had left an indelible mark on my psyche, shaping my understanding of fear and the supernatural. The terrifying experiences served as a stark reminder of the thin boundary between the known and the unknown. In the end, the haunting encounters taught me that fear can take many forms. The shadows that lurk in the corners of our lives can be both chilling and enlightening. The experiences, though terrifying, had a profound impact on my understanding of the supernatural and the nature of fear itself. It was a quiet evening when I first encountered what I can only describe as possibly supernatural events. I was alone at home, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when I heard a soft, eerie whisper coming from the empty room. At first, I thought it was just the wind. The whispering continued, growing more distinct and unsettling. Curiosity got the better of me, so I followed the sound. It led me to an old, forgotten room in the basement. The air was thick with dust and an odd chill that sent shivers down my spine. As I entered, I noticed an old, dusty mirror in the corner, and the whispering seemed to be emanating from it. I felt a strange pull towards it, as if something was trying to communicate with me. The whispers grew louder and more insistent. I could barely make out a few words, but they were disjointed and nonsensical. My heart raced as I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, even though the windows were all tightly shut. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I struggled to maintain my composure as the whispers became more intense. In an attempt to understand what was happening, I researched the history of the house. I discovered that it had once belonged to a reclusive artist who had died under mysterious circumstances. This revelation only added to the eerie atmosphere, and the whispers seemed to take on a new, more sinister quality. It was as if the spirit of the artist was trying to reach out to me. I decided to set up a recording device in the room to capture any further occurrences. Over the next few nights, the recordings revealed strange noises and faint, disembodied voices. The whispers were now accompanied by unsettling, unintelligible sounds, seemed to come from nowhere. The recordings only deepened the mystery, as if something was trying to make itself known, but was unable to fully communicate. One night, as I listened to the recordings, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Clear, unmistakable voice whispered my name. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could barely believe what I was hearing. It was as if the entity was trying to make a direct connection with me, and the sense of dread was palpable. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I reached out to a local paranormal group for help. They conducted their own investigation. Their findings were inconclusive. They reported feeling a strong presence in the room but could not provide any definitive answers. The whispers and strange phenomena remained unresolved, adding to the sense of unease. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the experience had a profound impact on me. The supernatural events had opened my eyes to a world beyond the ordinary, a realm where the boundaries of reality were blurred. The whispers from the beyond left an indelible mark on my perception of the supernatural and the unknown. As time passed, I learned to live with the lingering sense of mystery. The whispers had become a part of my life, a constant reminder of the unexplained and the eerie. The experience had shown me that sometimes the most unsettling events are those that defy explanation and leave us with more questions than answers. In the end, the possibly supernatural events taught me that the unknown can be both terrifying and fascinating. The whispers from the beyond, while unsettling, had a profound effect on my understanding of the supernatural and the thin veil that separates us from the unknown. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself in a situation that could only be described as dangerous. I was working the late shift at a local hospital, a job I'd grown accustomed to, but this night was different. As the clock ticked past midnight, a woman stumbled into the emergency room, her eyes wide with panic. She was gasping for breath, clutching her side and muttering incoherently about kidnappers. The woman's desperate state and frantic explanations set off alarm bells in my mind. I quickly alerted the security team and began to take her statement. She claimed she had escaped from a group of men who had been holding her captive in a nearby abandoned warehouse. Her story was chilling and disjointed, but she seemed genuinely terrified. Her claims were so alarming that I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. While I was attending to her, something felt off. The atmosphere in the emergency room grew tense, and the air seemed to thicken with unease. As I tried to get more information, the woman's story became increasingly erratic. She started mentioning a man who was following her, and her fear seemed to escalate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. Then, without warning, a shadowy figure appeared at the entrance of the emergency room. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of a man lurking just outside, his face obscured by the dim light. The woman's fear heightened, and she clung to me, grip tightening. The figure outside seemed to be waiting, watching, and I knew I had to act quickly. I discreetly signaled to the security team and kept a close eye on the figure. My instincts told me that this situation was more than it seemed, and I had to ensure the woman's safety. I continued to engage her in conversation while trying to keep the situation under control. The tension in the room was palpable, and every creak of the floorboards made my pulse quicken. Just as I was about to call for backup, the shadowy figure disappeared into the night. The woman's demeanor shifted from sheer panic to a cold, unsettling calm. She seemed almost relieved. as if her initial fear had been replaced by a new, more calculated demeanor. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After the figure vanished, I quickly escorted the woman to a safe area and contacted the authorities. They arrived promptly and began investigating the supposed warehouse. To my dismay, their search turned up nothing. No kidnappers, no warehouse, no evidence of the woman's claims. It was as if the entire situation had evaporated into thin air. In the days that followed, I learned that the woman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease. The incident had left me rattled and questioning the reality of what had transpired. Had it been an elaborate hoax, or was there something more sinister at work? The experience left an indelible mark on my psyche. The night of the near miss had shown me how quickly a seemingly ordinary situation could spiral into a dangerous and unnerving ordeal. It had also underscored the importance of vigilance and intuition in the face of potentially life-threatening circumstances. Reflecting on that night, I realized that danger often lurks in the most unexpected places. The shadowy figure and the woman's chilling story had revealed a stark truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous situations are those that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of reality. It was a foggy afternoon when I decided to venture into the dense forest behind my house, camera in hand, hoping to capture some wildlife. The thick mist rolled in, cloaking the woods in an eerie, otherworldly haze. As I wandered deeper, I noticed an unusual glow emanating from a distant valley, something I hadn't seen before. Curiosity piqued. I followed the faint lights, which seemed to flicker and dance through the trees. The deeper I went, the more the surroundings seemed to shift, as if the mist was weaving a tapestry of shadows around me. The glow grew stronger, drawing me closer to what appeared to be a secluded clearing, shrouded in an unsettling silence. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I stumbled upon an old, rusted gate, partially hidden by overgrown vines. Beyond it, a rundown building loomed in the fog, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. The sight was haunting, but what really caught my attention were the strange, metallic crates scattered around the perimeter. They seemed out of place, their presence adding a layer of mystery to the scene. I cautiously approached the gate, the eerie stillness punctuated only by the occasional rustling of leaves. The glow appeared to be coming from within the building, flickering intermittently as if trying to lure me in. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I noticed movement within the shadows, dark, indistinct shapes that seemed to shift. I pushed open the gate and stepped inside, my breath forming a misty cloud in the chilly air. The building was even more unsettling up close, with walls covered in strange symbols and markings. The glow I had seen from outside was now a pulsating, haunting light coming from a room at the back. My heart raced as I approached, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination. The room itself was dimly lit by the glow, which seemed to emanate from an old wooden table in the center. On the table lay an array of peculiar objects, ancient scrolls, odd trinkets, and what looked like a strange, ornate box with intricate carvings. The sight was both mesmerizing and unsettling, as if I had stumbled upon something meant to remain hidden. I reached out to inspect the box, my hands trembling. The moment I touched it, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me, and the room seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Shadows on the walls grew more animated, swirling around in a dance of darkness that defied explanation. I could feel a presence, a malevolent force that seemed to be watching me. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the building, startling me and causing the glow to flicker wildly. I spun around, my pulse racing, only to find the door to the room slamming shut on its own. Panic surged as I realized I was trapped, the eerie light casting long, menacing shadows that seemed to close in on me. Desperate to escape, I tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. The shadows seemed to move with intent, and the feeling of being watched grew overwhelming. I fumbled with the box, hoping it might hold the key to my escape. But it remained firmly shut. With a final burst of energy, I managed to pry the door open and stumbled out of the building, the glow and shadows receding behind me. I fled through the misty forest, my heart pounding and my mind reeling from the experience. When I finally emerged back into the daylight, I was left with an unsettling sense of dread and disbelief. The valley remained a mystery, its haunting glow and strange symbols defying any rational explanation. The experience left me questioning the nature of what I had encountered, and whether I had truly witnessed something supernatural. The Valley of Shadows had revealed a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding, where the line between reality and the supernatural blurred into chilling ambiguity. Reuniting with my old friends for a basketball tournament was a blast. After years apart, it felt great to be back together, reminiscing about our high school days. One evening, someone suggested we hike to an abandoned school in the forest. We all agreed, eager for some adventure. Seth, however, seemed uneasy. He had encountered something unsettling in those woods years ago, but he reluctantly agreed to join us. The hike started off well. The forest was dense and mysterious, with sunlight filtering through the tall trees. As we walked, we joked and laughed, the camaraderie from our youth rekindling. Seth was quiet, though, his eyes darting around nervously. Kept urging us to stay on the trail, his fear palpable. Despite his anxiety, the mood was light, and we continued deeper into the woods. About an hour into our hike, the atmosphere changed. The forest grew eerily silent, and a chilling wind rustled the leaves. Seth's apprehension intensified, and he warned us that we were nearing the spot where he had his previous encounter. We dismissed his fears, thinking it was just old nerves. Then we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around us. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, and we all froze in place. We scanned the area, trying to locate the source of the noise. Suddenly, a creature resembling a wendigo emerged from the shadows. It was tall, gaunt, and terrifying, glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. Panic set in, and we started to back away slowly. Seth tripped over a root and fell, injuring his ankle. The creature's growl grew louder, and we knew we had to act fast. We helped Seth to his feet, our fear driving us forward. With Seth leaning on us, we moved as quickly as we could. The creature seemed to follow, presence looming in the shadows. Our breaths were ragged, and the fear was overwhelming. The once familiar forest now felt like a maze, each step filled with dread. We stumbled upon an old shed and decided to take shelter inside. The air was thick with tension as we huddled together, hoping the creature would pass us by. Inside the shed, the eerie silence was deafening. We could hear the creature outside, its growls and footsteps echoing in the night. Seth was in pain, but he urged us to stay quiet. Fear was suffocating, and every sound made us jump. The shed felt like a fragile barrier between us and the horrors outside. We knew we couldn't stay there forever, but the thought of leaving was terrifying. After what felt like hours, the noises outside began to fade. We waited a bit longer, ensuring the coast was clear. With Seth still injured, we decided to head back to the main trail, sticking together. The forest seemed to watch us, its shadows hiding unknown dangers. We moved cautiously, our senses heightened. The fear from our encounter lingered, making every rustle of leaves feel like a threat. As we neared the trailhead, relief washed over us. We helped Seth to a nearby bench, his ankle swollen but not broken. The experience had shaken us all, but we were grateful to be safe. Seth's old fears had proven true, and we realized the forest held more secrets than we had ever imagined. The once exciting hike had turned into a chilling adventure, one that we would never forget. Back at the cabin, we discussed our encounter, trying to make sense of what we had seen. Creature, the eerie noises, and Seth's injury had left us all rattled. We decided not to return to the abandoned school, fear too fresh in our minds. The reunion, once filled with joy and laughter, had taken a haunting turn. The memory of our hike would stay with us, a reminder of the chilling events that unfolded in Deep Creek Woods. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The eerie forest, the terrifying creature, and the fear we felt are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the chilling reality that danger can be just around the corner. Exploring the desert of eastern Washington had always been a thrilling adventure for me and my friend Jake. The vast, arid landscape was filled with hidden wonders and mysteries, waiting to be uncovered. One scorching afternoon, we decided to venture deeper into the desert than ever before. We packed our gear, filled our water bottles, and set off, eager to discover something new. The sun was relentless, and the air was thick, promise of an eerie adventure. As we trekked further into the desert, the landscape became more desolate and haunting. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground and the occasional call of a distant bird. After hours of hiking, we stumbled upon a strange sight, a burnt circle of rocks, perfectly arranged in a ritualistic pattern. In the center of the circle was a small, tattered doll, body charred and covered in symbols. The scene was chilling, and a sense of unease washed over us. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances. The air around us seemed to grow colder, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. We debated whether to investigate further or leave immediately. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to take a closer look. As we approached the circle, we heard faint laughter echoing around us, sending shivers down our spines. The laughter seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, adding to the haunting atmosphere. We carefully examined the doll and the rocks, trying to decipher the symbols. The laughter grew louder, almost mocking us. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the desert, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Jake suggested we leave, but I felt a strange compulsion to stay and uncover the mystery. As we stood there, debating our next move, we noticed something even more disturbing. A downed power line lying across the path we had just walked. The power line crackled with electricity, and we realized how close we had come to stepping on it. The thought was terrifying, and we both felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. The eerie laughter continued, and it seemed to mock our near-death experience. The desert, once a place of adventure, had become a chilling landscape of danger. We decided it was time to leave, but the sense of unease followed us as we retraced our steps. As we made our way back, the desert seemed to close in around us. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. Every sound seemed amplified, and the laughter still echoed in our minds. We quickened our pace, fear growing with each step. Thought of the burnt circle and the doll haunted us, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The desert, once so familiar, had become a place of terror. Back at our campsite, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. The experience had left us both shaken, and the memory of the ritualistic circle and the eerie laughter lingered. We decided to report our findings to the local authorities, hoping they could provide some answers. The sense of relief was short-lived, as we realized the desert held many more secrets than we could ever imagine. The haunting experience had changed our perception of the place forever. The authorities took our report seriously and promised to investigate. However, they warned us that the desert was filled with unexplained phenomena, and that it was best to stay away from such areas. The thought was chilling, but we couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity mixed with fear. The experience had left an indelible mark on us, and we knew we would never forget the haunting sights and sounds of that day. In the days that followed, Jake and I avoided the desert, fear still fresh in our minds. The memory of the burnt circle and the eerie laughter was a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the arid landscape. The desert, once a place of adventure, had become a haunting landscape filled with mysteries we were not prepared to face. The experience had bonded us in a way nothing else could, and we often found ourselves discussing it, trying to make sense of it all. Years later, the memory of that day still sends shivers down my spine. The burnt circle of rocks, the charred doll, and the eerie laughter are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the desert and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The desert of eastern Washington will never be the same for us. forever marked by that fateful encounter. Living in a remote forest has its perks: the tranquility, the beauty, and the sense of being away from the hustle and bustle of city life. One night, however, the serene setting took on a chilling tone. I was taking out the trash, a routine task, but the darkness that night felt different. The sky was moonless, and the forest seemed to close in around me. I felt an eerie presence, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. As I walked down the path to the trash bins, the feeling of being watched intensified. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the still night. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the shadows seemed to shift and move, creating an almost tangible sense of dread. I quickened my pace, eager to finish the task and return to the safety of my home. Just as I reached the bins, I heard a soft whisper behind me. My heart skipped a beat and I spun around, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the fear remained. I could feel my pulse racing, the eerie atmosphere wrapping around me like a shroud. Despite my fear, I completed the task and started back to the house. The path seemed longer, the darkness more oppressive. Every step felt like an eternity, and the sense of being followed never left me. I tried to focus on the lights of the house in the distance, a beacon of safety amidst the chilling darkness. The whispering returned, more insistent this time, sending shivers down my spine. I finally reached the house, bursting through the door and locking it behind me. The warmth and light of the interior were a stark contrast to the eerie coldness outside. My family looked at me with concern, noticing my pale face and trembling hands. I recounted my experience, the fear still fresh in my mind. They listened intently, their expressions shifting from concern to a shared sense of unease. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the house and rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified, feeding my anxiety. The memory of the whispers and the feeling of being watched haunted my thoughts. I kept the lights on, hoping to ward off the darkness and the fear it brought. The once comforting silence of the forest had turned into a haunting reminder of the night's events. In the days that followed, I avoided going outside after dark. The fear lingered, and the memory of the whispers was always at the back of my mind. I tried to rationalize the experience, convincing myself it was just a trick of the mind. But the eerie feeling was hard to shake. The darkness had taken on a new, sinister meaning, and the forest no longer felt like a safe haven. As time passed, the fear slowly faded, but the memory never left. The experience had changed my perception of the forest and the darkness. I found myself more cautious, always aware of my surroundings. The once routine task of taking out the trash had become a source of anxiety. The haunting presence of that night was a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked in the shadows. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The feeling of being watched, the eerie whispers, and the oppressive darkness are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the forest and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The remote forest, once a place of peace, had become a haunting reminder of that night. Living in a remote area of Elbert, Colorado, had always been a dream for my family. The isolation provided peace and quiet, perfect escape from the chaos of city life. But as the months passed, the tranquility of our cabin began to take on a more chilling tone. It started with small, almost unnoticeable events. Objects moved slightly out of place, strange noises at night, and an eerie feeling of being watched. First, we dismissed it as our imaginations running wild in the vast silence. One night, however, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. We were sitting in the living room, the only sounds coming from the crackling fireplace and the occasional hoot of an owl outside. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, startling us all. It sounded like a door slamming shut with immense force. My husband and I exchanged uneasy glances and decided to investigate. The house was old, and we assumed it was just the wind. But the eerie feeling lingered. As we checked the doors and windows, we found nothing out of place. The unease grew stronger, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified, feeding our anxiety. The isolation that once brought comfort now felt suffocating, the cabin's walls closing in on us. The haunting atmosphere was almost tangible. Strange occurrences continued. We would hear footsteps in the hallway at night, even though no one was there. Doors would creak open on their own, and the temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms. My children started to complain about seeing shadows moving in their bedrooms. Their fear was palpable, and it broke my heart to see them so scared. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and we knew we had to do something. One evening, I decided to set up a camera in the hallway to capture whatever was causing the disturbances. I hoped that seeing proof would either confirm our fears or put them to rest. As we reviewed the footage the next morning, our hearts sank. The camera had recorded a series of chilling events, doors opening and closing by themselves, shadowy figures moving across the walls, and a faint, eerie whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. The evidence was undeniable. We reached out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping they could provide some answers. The investigator arrived a few days later, equipped with various tools and a calm, reassuring demeanor. As they conducted their investigation, the tension in the house was palpable. The investigator's presence seemed to stir up even more activity. We heard loud bangs, saw objects move on their own, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The investigator concluded that our cabin was indeed haunted by multiple spirits, likely connected to the land's history. They recommended a cleansing ritual to help ease the spirits and restore peace to our home. We agreed, desperate for relief from the constant fear. The ritual was performed, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. The eerie noises and movements lessened, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. However, the peace was short-lived. The haunting activity returned with a vengeance, more intense than ever. It felt as if the spirits were angry about the cleansing attempt. The fear became unbearable, and we decided to leave the cabin. The decision was heartbreaking, as we had poured our hearts into making it our home. But our safety and sanity were more important. We packed our belongings and moved back to the city, leaving behind the haunting memories. Years later, the memory of our time in the haunted cabin still sends shivers down my spine. The eerie noises, the chilling evidence, and the oppressive atmosphere are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the supernatural and the chilling reality that some places are best left undisturbed. The remote cabin in Elbert, Colorado, will always be a haunting chapter in our lives. A late-night adventure in the woods with friends always sounded like a good idea to us. The thrill of exploring the unknown and the promise of a few harmless scares kept us excited. One night, we decided to venture deep into the forest near my house. Equipped with flashlights and plenty of bravado, we set off into the dark, laughing and joking as we walked. The forest, however, had other plans. As we ventured deeper, the mood shifted. The laughter died down, replaced by an eerie silence. Trees seemed to close in on us, their branches casting creepy shadows in the moonlight. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. We stopped, turning our flashlights towards the sound, but saw nothing. The sense of being watched was almost palpable, and a chilling fear began to set in. We tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. Determined to prove our bravery, we continued walking. The forest grew darker, and the sounds of the night seemed to grow louder. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig made us jump. Fear was building, but none of us wanted to admit it. As we pressed on, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned shed. It looked like it had been there for years, its walls covered in moss and vines. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. We decided to take shelter in the shed, hoping to escape the eerie feeling of being watched. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor was littered with old tools and debris. We sat in a circle, our flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was tense, and the fear was almost suffocating. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the shed. They were slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the stillness. Our hearts pounded as we tried to stay quiet. The footsteps grew louder, and we could hear someone or something moving around the shed. The fear was overwhelming, and we huddled together, hoping it would pass. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We knew we had to leave. The thought of facing whatever was out there was terrifying. We gathered our courage and slowly opened the door, peering out into the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet, and the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. We stepped out of the shed, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and the fear was almost paralyzing. We decided to head back to the house, moving as quickly as we could without breaking into a run. As we walked, footsteps returned, this time following us. Fear turned into panic, and we broke into a sprint, the house our only sanctuary. Forest seemed to close in on us, the trees and shadows becoming more menacing. The footsteps were right behind us, and the sense of being chased was overwhelming. We didn't dare look back, fear driving us forward. We burst out of the forest and onto the lawn, the house a beacon of safety. We ran inside, slamming the door behind us and locking it. The relief was immediate, but the fear lingered. We sat in the living room, trying to catch our breath and make sense of what had happened. The experience had shaken us all, and the once fun adventure had turned into a nightmare. Forest, once a place of wonder, become a place of terror. The next day, we decided to go back to the shed in the daylight, hoping to find some rational explanation for the night's events. But as we reached the spot where the shed had stood, there was nothing there. No building, no footsteps, nothing. The realization that the shed had disappeared sent chills down our spines. The forest held secrets we couldn't begin to understand, and the fear of the unknown was more haunting than ever. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The eerie footsteps, the sense of being watched, and the vanishing shed are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the forest and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The woods, once a place of adventure, had become a haunting chapter in our lives. Just as he was starting to relax by the fire, the strange growl returned. This time, it was closer, and he could hear movement in the underbrush. Michael grabbed a stick, ready to defend himself. The fear was overwhelming, but he knew he had to stay alert. The growling continued, and he caught a glimpse of a large, shadowy figure moving through the trees. The sight was chilling, and he realized he was not alone in the wilderness. Figure circled his campsite, baying just out of the fire's light. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew he had to act. Gathering his courage, he threw a burning log into the darkness, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. The growling stopped, and the figure disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was deafening, and Michael knew he had to leave the campsite. With no other options, he packed his essentials and set off on foot. Determined to find help, the fear of encountering the creature again was a constant presence, driving him forward. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, each step filled with trepidation. The growls echoed in his mind, and the eerie feeling of being watched never left him. As dawn broke, he stumbled upon a dirt road and followed it, praying it would lead to safety. Hours later, he found a small ranger station. Exhausted and terrified, he recounted his ordeal to the rangers. They listened with a mix of concern and disbelief, promised to investigate. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but the memory of the night's events lingered. Pine Barrens, once a place of peace, become a place of nightmares. Michael's encounter with the unknown had shaken him to his core. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The eerie growls, the slashed tires, and the shadowy figure are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the wilderness and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The Pine Barrens, once a refuge, had become a haunting reminder of that terrifying weekend. Wyatt Harkins was an experienced surveyor, and he loved the solitude and challenge of working in remote areas. The Oahe Wilderness was his latest assignment, vast and rugged landscape that promised both beauty and difficulty. Setting up camp, he felt the familiar excitement of exploring uncharted territory. The days were long and the work was hard, but Wyatt relished every moment. However, this trip would prove to be different from any other he had experienced. One evening, as Wyatt was finishing up his work, he noticed strange tracks near his campsite. They were large and unidentifiable, unlike any animal tracks he had seen before. The sight of them sent a chill down his spine. Dismissing it as a curious anomaly, he continued with his task. But the eerie feeling lingered. That night, the forest seemed unusually silent, and the sense of being watched was almost tangible. As darkness fell, Wyatt sat by his campfire, trying to shake off the unease. The crackling fire provided some comfort, but the shadows cast by the flames seemed to dance with an eerie life of their own. Suddenly, he heard a rustling noise in the bushes. Grabbing his flashlight, he shone it towards the sound, saw nothing. The sense of dread grew stronger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. The next morning, Wyatt discovered that his camp had been ransacked. Supplies were scattered, and his equipment was damaged. The strange tracks were everywhere, adding to the chilling mystery. Fear gnawed at him as he tried to make sense of what had happened. Determined to finish his job, he repaired what he could and continued working, but the fear of another encounter loomed over him. As the days passed, Wyatt's fear intensified. The strange noises and the feeling of being watched became more frequent. One evening, while reviewing his maps, he heard a loud crash outside his tent. Stepping out cautiously, he saw a large, hunched figure moving through the trees. The sight was terrifying, and he quickly retreated into his tent, hoping it would pass. The figure lingered, its presence a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. Wyatt decided it was time to leave. The fear was too great, and his work was suffering. He packed his belongings and set off early the next morning, hoping to make it back to civilization without any further incident. As he walked, the sense of being followed never left him. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sent his heart racing. The wilderness, once a place of solace, had become a nightmarish landscape of fear. Hours into his journey, Wyatt realized he was lost. The unfamiliar terrain and his frayed nerves had led him off course. Panic set in as he tried to find his bearings. The sun was setting and the shadows grew longer, creating an eerie atmosphere. The fear of encountering the mysterious figure again was overwhelming. Wyatt pressed on, hoping to find a way out before darkness completely enveloped him. Just as despair began to take hold, Wyatt stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It offered a temporary refuge, and he decided to spend the night there. The cabin was musty and dilapidated, but it provided shelter from the chilling fear outside. As he settled in, the eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creak of the old wooden structure. The sense of being watched was ever present, making sleep difficult. In the early hours of the morning, Wyatt was jolted awake by a loud bang. The door of the cabin swung open, and the large, hunched figure stood in the doorway. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, grabbing the nearest object for protection. The figure stepped closer, and Wyatt's fear reached its peak. Just as he was about to strike, the figure stopped and turned, disappearing into the forest. Wyatt wasted no time. He packed up his things and left the cabin, determined to find his way out of the wilderness. The fear drove him forward, and by mid-morning, he stumbled upon a trail that led him back to a ranger station. Exhausted and terrified, he recounted his experience to the rangers. They listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief. Wyatt's ordeal was over. The memory would haunt him forever. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The strange tracks, the ransacked camp, and the large hunched figure are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the wilderness and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The Oahe Wilderness, once a place of challenge and beauty, had become a haunting chapter in Wyatt's life. Exploring Deep Creek Woods had always been a favorite pastime of mine. The dense forest was filled with mysteries and the promise of adventure. One evening, as the sun began to set, I ventured deeper than usual, enticed by the serene beauty of the place. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence fell over the woods. It was then that I saw it, a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen, a werewolf-like beast with glowing eyes that pierced the dusk. The creature stood on two legs, its body covered in thick, matted fur. It let out a chilling growl that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I navigated the twisted paths of the forest. The sounds of the creature's pursuit were deafening, branches snapping and leaves rustling. I didn't dare look back, fear propelling me forward. Somehow I managed to escape, bursting out of the woods and into the safety of my backyard. My friends, gathered around the fire pit, looked at me in shock. Between gasps, I recounted my encounter, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Their initial disbelief turned to concern as they saw the terror in my eyes. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to go back the next night, armed and ready to confront the creature. That night, we ventured into the woods together, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Eerie silence returned, and the air was thick with tension. We moved cautiously, our senses heightened. Suddenly, we heard the same chilling growl I had heard the previous night. The creature emerged from the shadows, more terrifying than I remembered. This time we were prepared. We aimed our weapons, but the beast was fast, darting through the trees with unnatural speed. The confrontation was brief and chaotic. One of my friends, Mike, got separated from the group. The creature lunged at him and a scream pierced the night. We rushed to his aid, but it was too late. Mike lay on the ground, lifeless, with deep gashes across his body. The sight was gruesome, and the horror of it all struck us to the core. We retreated, dragging Mike's body back to the clearing, the weight of our loss hanging heavily in the air. Michael Johnson was no stranger to the wilderness. He often ventured into the Pine Barrens for solo camping trips, enjoying the solitude and the chance to reconnect with nature. One weekend, he decided to take a break from his hectic life and head out for a few days of peace and quiet. Packing his truck with all the necessary supplies, he drove deep into the forest, eager for the adventure that awaited him. The first day was perfect. Michael set up his campsite near a tranquil stream, the sound of water adding to the serene atmosphere. He spent the day hiking, fishing, and basking in the beauty of the forest. As night fell, he built a fire and settled in with a good book. The isolation was exactly what he needed. The stars twinkled overhead, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. But as the fire died down, an eerie feeling began to creep in. In the middle of the night, Michael was jolted awake by a strange noise outside his tent. First, he thought it might be an animal, but the sound was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was a low, guttural growl, chilling in its intensity. Grabbing his flashlight and stepping out of the tent, he scanned the darkness. The beam of light revealed nothing, but the eerie feeling of being watched was palpable. He decided to stay up, fear keeping him alert. The next morning, he found something disturbing. His truck's tires had been slashed. Panic set in as he realized he was stranded in the middle of nowhere. The sense of isolation, once comforting, was now terrifying. He tried to remain calm, assessing his situation. With no cell service and miles from the nearest road, he knew he had to rely on his survival skills. The thought of what or who had done this filled him with dread. Michael decided to stay at the campsite for another night, hoping to figure out a plan in the morning. As the day went on, the forest seemed to close in on him. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig made him jump. The eerie feeling from the night before had not dissipated. He built a larger fire, hoping it would keep whatever was out there at bay. As night fell, the forest grew unnaturally quiet, amplifying his fear. Just as he was starting to relax by the fire, the strange growl returned. This time, it was closer, and he could hear movement in the underbrush. Michael grabbed a stick, ready to defend himself. The fear was overwhelming, but he knew he had to stay alert. The growling continued, and he caught a glimpse of a large, shadowy figure moving through the trees. The sight was chilling, and he realized he was not alone in the wilderness. Figure circled his campsite, baying just out of the fire's light. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew he had to act. Gathering his courage, he threw a burning log into the darkness, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. The growling stopped, and the figure disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was deafening, and Michael knew he had to leave the campsite. With no other options, packed his essentials and set off on foot. Determined to find help, the fear of encountering the creature again was a constant presence, driving him forward. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, each step filled with trepidation. The growls echoed in his mind, and the eerie feeling of being watched never left him. As dawn broke, he stumbled upon a dirt road and followed it, praying it would lead to safety. Hours later, he found a small ranger station. Exhausted and terrified, he recounted his ordeal to the rangers. They listened with a mix of concern and disbelief, promised to investigate. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but the memory of the night's events lingered. Pine Barrens, once a place of peace, became a place of nightmares. Michael's encounter with the unknown had shaken him to his core. Years later, the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. The eerie growls, the slashed tires, and the shadowy figure are etched into my mind. It's a story I share with caution, knowing the fear it can evoke. The experience remains a testament to the unpredictability of the wilderness and the chilling reality that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The Pine Barrens, once a refuge, had become a haunting reminder of that terrifying weekend. It was one of those nights in New York City where the air felt unusually thick and heavy. I was taking the subway home after a late shift, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. The station was nearly empty, casting eerie shadows on the tiled walls. As I waited for the train, a chilling sense of unease settled over me, but I brushed it off as just another late-night paranoia. When the train arrived, I stepped in, finding a sparse crowd. Most passengers seemed lost in their thoughts or asleep. I settled into a seat near the middle, trying to shake off the lingering feeling that something was amiss. Just as the doors were about to close, a disheveled man stumbled in, clutching his stomach and looking distressed. His appearance was unsettling. His clothes were ragged, and his eyes were wild. The man took a seat across from me, his breathing ragged and erratic. He kept glancing around the car, his eyes darting from one person to another, as if searching for something. The atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense, and I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. It was as if the man's presence had cast a dark, eerie pall over the entire subway car. Suddenly, he began muttering to himself in a low, menacing tone. His words were incoherent, but the threatening undertone was unmistakable. He kept repeating phrases like, "They're coming for us," and "You'll all pay." The chilling, almost haunting quality of his voice made everyone in the car shift uncomfortably in their seats. The fear was palpable, and the normally mundane subway ride had turned into a nerve-wracking ordeal. The train lurched forward, and the lights flickered. The man's mutterings grew louder, more frantic. I could see other passengers exchanging worried glances, their faces reflecting the same growing sense of fear. Flickering lights seemed to add to the eerie atmosphere, casting unsettling shadows on the walls of the car. Felt as though we were descending into a scene from a horror film, the tension becoming almost unbearable. I decided to keep my distance, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. The man's behavior grew more erratic by the minute. He started pacing the car, occasionally stopping to stare at passengers with a haunting intensity. His eyes seemed to pierce through the dim light, giving off an unsettling, ghostly aura that made it hard to breathe. As the train approached the next stop, the man suddenly collapsed on the floor, clutching his stomach. The car was filled with a haunting silence, broken only by his groans and the distant hum of the train. The situation felt eerily surreal, as if reality itself had shifted. Everyone in the car watched in fearful silence, unsure of what to do or how to react. The train finally came to a halt, and the doors opened. The man remained on the floor, his breathing becoming more labored. Some passengers cautiously exited the car, while others hesitated, torn between their fear and a desire to help. The entire scene was shrouded in a chilling sense of dread, as if something malevolent had been unleashed. As I stepped off the train, I glanced back one last time. The man was still lying on the floor, surrounded by a few concerned passengers and the flickering, eerie lights of the subway car. I hurried up the stairs to the street level, my heart pounding in my chest. The unsettling encounter left me with a lingering sense of fear and an eerie feeling that something far darker than just a late-night incident had transpired. The incident haunted me for weeks. Every time I rode the subway after that night, I couldn't shake the chilling memory of that man and the frightening atmosphere he brought with him. The experience served as a grim reminder of how quickly a seemingly ordinary night can turn into a haunting, eerie ordeal, leaving an indelible mark on your sense of safety. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway at my friend's cottage in Muskoka, a place known for its stunning natural beauty and serene environment. The weather was perfect, and the cottage itself was charming, nestled in a quiet wooded area. Little did I know, this idyllic retreat would soon become the backdrop for some truly eerie and unsettling experiences. On the first evening, everything seemed normal. We enjoyed a bonfire by the lake and shared stories under the starry sky. However, as night fell and we retired to the cottage, an unsettling sensation began to creep over me. It started with the sound of footsteps, faint yet unmistakable, echoing through the empty rooms. At first, I thought it was the old house settling, but the sound persisted, growing more pronounced as the night wore on. The following day, while exploring the surrounding woods, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned sawmill. It seemed out of place, almost like a relic from a bygone era, hidden away in the depths of the forest. As I ventured closer, I felt a strange chill in the air, and a sense of unease settled over me. It was as if the place held a dark secret, something that was better left undisturbed. That night, the unsettling sensations reached a new level. I was awoken by the sound of heavy footsteps outside my bedroom door. My heart raced as I listened to the sound of someone, or something, walking around the cottage. Footsteps grew louder, and a cold draft swept through the room, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Despite my fear, I mustered the courage to check, only to find nothing but the empty hallway. As the days went by, the eerie occurrences became more frequent. I began hearing footsteps that seemed to follow me around the cottage, and doors would creak open on their own. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of what I can only describe as faint, ghostly whispers. The voices were unintelligible, but carried an unmistakable tone of melancholy and desperation. The haunting whispers seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, creating an atmosphere of dread. The sense of being watched was inescapable. Every time I glanced around the cottage, I felt as though eyes were following me, hidden in the shadows. Even during daylight, feeling persisted, making the once comforting space feel claustrophobic and unsettling. It was as if the very walls of the cottage were imbued with an oppressive, ghostly presence. One evening, while sitting on the porch, I noticed something strange. The trees around the cottage seemed to move, but not in a natural way. It was as if they were shifting and closing in, creating a claustrophobic feeling. The darkness of the forest seemed to grow thicker, and a sense of foreboding hung heavily in the air. I tried to rationalize it, but the eerie atmosphere was impossible to ignore. As the weekend drew to a close, I decided to investigate the history of the cottage and its surrounding. To my dismay, I discovered that the area had been the site of several tragic accidents, including a sawmill disaster, claimed many lives. The chilling connection between these events and the eerie occurrences I experienced became clear, adding a layer of unsettling context to the already frightening situation. Leaving the cottage was a relief, but the experience left me deeply shaken. Haunting sensations and eerie encounters had turned what was meant to be a peaceful retreat into a nightmarish ordeal. Memories of those chilling footsteps, ghostly whispers, and the dark, oppressive atmosphere lingered long after I left Muskoka. The weekend at the cottage remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. The combination of unexplained phenomena and the tragic history of the area created a haunting and unforgettable experience. It serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly idyllic escape can turn into a chilling encounter, the unknown. It was a cool, crisp evening when I decided to take a drive through the sleepy, winding roads of Sleepy Hollow. The area was famed for its local legends, but I had always thought of them as mere stories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of dark blue and purple, I felt a peculiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The haunting atmosphere of Sleepy Hollow had always intrigued me, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to unfold. As I drove deeper into the heart of Sleepy Hollow, the road narrowed and the trees seemed to close in around me. The darkness was almost tangible, and the only light came from my car's headlights, casting eerie shadows on the dense foliage. It was then that I saw her, a figure standing by the side of the road. She was dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by the dim light. A chill ran down my spine as I slowed the car, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed intently on the approaching vehicle. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, yet unsettlingly out of place. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow connected to the old legends of Sleepy Hollow, tales of spectral figures and tragic fates. As I drew closer, the air around the car seemed to grow colder, and a sense of dread settled heavily over me. I stopped the car a few feet from her, my heart racing. The woman's presence was both captivating and terrifying. She didn't move, and her gaze never wavered. The longer I looked, the more I felt as if I were being pulled into an unsettling, ghostly trance. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The atmosphere was thick with an eerie, oppressive silence that seemed to amplify every sound. Desperate to understand what was happening, I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen remained stubbornly black. It was as if the technology itself had been swallowed by the darkness of the night. The woman's figure appeared to shimmer in and out of focus, adding to the spectral quality of the encounter. I felt a sudden urge to drive away. My body seemed frozen, caught in the grip of sheer terror. Just as I was about to accelerate, the woman slowly turned her head and began walking away, her gown trailing behind her like mist. I watched in stunned silence as she disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a feeling of profound unease. The road seemed even darker and more foreboding now, as if her presence had somehow drained the very light from the night. I quickly drove away, my heart pounding and my mind racing. The encounter had left me shaken and disoriented. When I reached a well-lit area, I glanced back at the road, half expecting to see the ghostly figure reappear. The normalcy of the surroundings did little to dispel the lingering sense of dread. I couldn't escape the feeling that the woman's presence was more than just a figment of my imagination. It was a chilling reminder of the legends that still seemed to haunt Sleepy Hollow. As I tried to rationalize the experience, I realized that no amount of logical explanation could erase the eerie encounter from my mind. The haunting vision of the woman in white remained etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of how the supernatural can intertwine with reality in the most unsettling ways. The night in Sleepy Hollow had proven that some legends are not just stories, but eerie realities that linger in the shadows. It all began one quiet evening when I noticed a strange phenomenon in my house. Shadowy figures darting around the corners of my vision. At first I dismissed them as tricks of the light, or perhaps my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But the shadows persisted, growing more distinct and unsettling with each passing night. The feeling of being watched was both chilling and inescapable. One night, while trying to relax in my living room, I saw a shadowy figure move swiftly across the wall. It was a dark, indistinct shape, seemingly shifting and flickering as if it were alive. The figure was gone in an instant, leaving me with an unsettling sense of dread. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a figment of my imagination, but the growing frequency of these encounters left me increasingly disturbed. As the days went by, the shadow figures became bolder. They would appear more often, sometimes lingering in the corners of rooms, or even seeming to follow me as I moved through the house. The oppressive atmosphere they brought with them was hard to ignore. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the curtains seemed to heighten the sense of foreboding. One particularly frightening encounter occurred while I was working late in my study. The room was dimly lit, and I was engrossed in my tasks when I felt a sudden cold draft. I glanced up and saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its shape vaguely humanoid, but not entirely distinct. The figure seemed to waver and shift, creating an almost hypnotic effect. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't move. I mustered the courage to approach the doorway, only to find it empty. The sensation of being watched persisted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure had been there, watching me intently. The unsettling experience left me feeling anxious and paranoid, as if the very walls of my home had become a stage for some malevolent entity. The most disturbing encounter happened one night when I was preparing for bed. As I walked down the hallway, I saw a shadowy figure standing by the bedroom door. This time, the figure was not fleeting but seemed to be deliberately blocking my path. I felt an intense fear, as if the figure was trying to prevent me from entering my own room. My heart raced as I quickly backed away, the figure slowly fading into the darkness. In the following days, the shadowy figures continued to appear, each encounter more unnerving than the last. I began to feel a sense of paranoia, constantly on edge and dreading the moment when the shadows would make their presence known. I started researching the phenomenon, hoping to find answers and understand what was happening in my home. The research led me to discover that shadow figures are often associated with paranormal activity and can be manifestations of negative energy or malevolent entities. The idea that something sinister might be lurking in my home only added to my fear. Despite my attempts to seek help, the shadow figures continued to haunt my daily life, casting an eerie pall over every aspect of my existence. Eventually, I decided to take a different approach, focusing on creating a more positive and calming environment in my home. I made changes to the lighting, added soothing elements to the decor, and practiced mindfulness to alleviate the anxiety that had become part of my daily routine. Though the shadow figures still appeared occasionally, their presence seemed less menacing, and the overall atmosphere of my home gradually improved. The experience with the shadow figures left me with a profound understanding of how fear can shape our perception of reality. While I never fully understood the nature of these spectral shadows, the encounter was a chilling reminder of how the unknown can infiltrate our lives and create a sense of dread that lingers long after the shadows have faded. It was supposed to be a routine nature photography trip. I had ventured into a remote valley, following a series of mysterious lights that had appeared in the distance. As I trekked deeper into the wilderness, the eerie glow seemed to pulse in the darkness, guiding me towards an unknown destination. The excitement of discovering something extraordinary overshadowed the creeping sense of unease that tugged at the back of my mind. As I approached the source of the lights, the scene before me became increasingly surreal. I stumbled upon a heavily fortified facility, hidden away in the dense foliage. The complex was surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire, and there were armed guards patrolling the perimeter. The sight was so unexpected and chilling that I almost couldn't believe my eyes. I knew I had to be cautious. I was clearly intruding on something deeply secretive. I managed to find a small gap in the fence and slipped inside. The facility was vast, with a series of stark, utilitarian buildings and rows of darkened windows. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the air felt charged with an unsettling energy. As I crept through the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, each step echoing in the silence of the night. Exploring further, I discovered a series of large crates stacked haphazardly in one of the buildings. The crates were marked with strange symbols and appeared to contain various items covered in dark, opaque tarps. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously lifted one of the tarps. What lay beneath was too strange to describe clearly. Various components and objects that seemed out of place, almost otherworldly. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Suddenly I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Panic surged through me, and I quickly ducked behind a stack of crates, my breathing shallow and rapid. Through the slits between the crates, I saw a group of figures in dark uniforms moving with purpose. They seemed to be conducting some sort of inspection, their presence adding an extra layer of fear to the already eerie situation. Realizing the danger I was in, I decided it was time to leave. I carefully retraced my steps, avoiding any contact with the facility's personnel. The journey back through the dense forest was fraught with anxiety, as every rustle in the underbrush seemed to signal my potential discovery. The haunting feeling of being pursued was palpable, and I quickened my pace, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever operation was being conducted. Once safely away from the facility, I looked back at the distant lights, now dim and insignificant against the vast expanse of darkness. The experience had left me shaken, and I couldn't help but wonder about the true nature of what I had encountered. The secrecy and the guarded environment suggested something far beyond ordinary, and the unsettling feeling of being watched lingered long after I had left the area. Despite my attempts to research and find answers, the facility remained shrouded in mystery. I discovered no concrete information about its existence or purpose. The experience was a chilling reminder of how hidden aspects of the world can intersect with our lives in unexpected and haunting ways. The encounter left me with a profound sense of unease, knowing that there are places and secrets out there that remain beyond our grasp, lurking just out of sight. It was a quiet night shift at the hospital when everything took a sinister turn. I was just finishing up some paperwork when a frantic woman burst through the emergency room doors. Her clothes were disheveled, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She pleaded for help, claiming she had escaped from a group of kidnappers. The urgency in her voice was palpable, and it was impossible not to feel a twinge of empathy for her distress. As she recounted her story, she spoke of a dark, isolated location where she had been held captive. Her tale was chilling, filled with details about a secluded cabin and men who were waiting to come after her. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it made my skin crawl. I decided to call the police, believing it was my duty to ensure her safety and get her the help she needed. Little did I know, this decision would lead me into a terrifying trap. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, I noticed a man lingering outside the hospital entrance. He seemed out of place, his gaze fixed intently on the woman. A growing sense of unease settled over me as I realized that the situation was more complicated than it initially seemed. The woman's story began to unravel. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and I started to suspect that something was not right. The man outside suddenly moved closer, and I saw him talking to the woman in hushed tones. My instincts told me to be cautious, but I was torn between wanting to help and the growing feeling that I was being drawn into something dangerous. Just as I was about to approach them, the woman suddenly turned, her demeanor shifting from desperation to a cold, calculating calm. The man's expression changed too. He was no longer a stranger, but someone I now realized was part of a sinister plot. Panic surged through me as the situation took a horrifying turn. The woman grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit, her grip vice-like. The man followed closely behind, his intentions now all too clear. My heart raced as I fought to free myself. The woman's strength was unnervingly strong. In the chaos, I managed to break free and ran towards the back of the hospital, desperately seeking a way out of this nightmarish scenario. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, and the echo of footsteps behind me added to my terror. I burst through the emergency exit and into the dark, deserted parking lot. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted towards my car, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if I had been a moment too slow. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I could still hear the man's voice shouting orders in the distance. With a final burst of adrenaline, I sped away from the hospital, my mind reeling from the encounter. The sight of the woman's face, twisted with malevolent intent, and the man's threatening presence haunted me long after I had driven away. The whole episode felt like a chilling blur of fear and confusion, a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly ordinary situation can spiral into a horrifying nightmare. In the days that followed, I tried to piece together what had happened, but the answers remained elusive. The incident left me with a profound sense of vulnerability and a heightened awareness of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. The experience was a haunting reminder of the thin line between safety and danger, and it made me wary of trusting too easily. When my family and I moved into the old Victorian house, we thought it was a dream come true. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood with sprawling grounds, it seemed perfect, until the unsettling occurrences began. At first, it was just little things, doors creaking open by themselves, and the sensation of being watched. It was the kind of stuff that makes you glance over your shoulder, but nothing too alarming. Yet, one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, each step growing louder and more distinct. I went to check, but there was no one there. The silence that followed was almost more chilling than the footsteps. It was as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Things took a darker turn when a large snake appeared outside our door. At first, it was just another creepy crawly, but its sudden appearance seemed almost too coincidental. We found out later that the snake wasn't just a random visitor. It seemed to be a part of the house's strange happening. It slithered away into the night, leaving us with a sense of unease. The more time we spent in the house, the more intense the occurrences became. The footsteps were no longer just noises. They felt like a presence moving through the rooms. Doors would swing open with an eerie force, and objects would be found in places we were sure we hadn't left them. Each day felt like a step further into a chilling unknown. One particularly frightening evening, my children and I heard a loud thud from the basement. It was followed by a low guttural growl that sent shivers down our spine. We hesitated, but decided to investigate. As we descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. We found nothing, but the sense of foreboding lingered long after. In our search for answers, we learned that the house had a troubled history. Previous owners had reported similar disturbances, but no one had ever managed to find an explanation. It seemed the house had a dark past that refused to stay buried. Stories of other families' eerie encounters painted a haunting picture of our new home. Despite our efforts to make the house feel like ours, paranormal activities continued. It became a part of our daily life, chilling background to our otherwise normal routines. We grew accustomed to the strange noises and the ghostly presences, learning to live alongside them as if they were simply another member of the household. Every now and then, we would have moments where the presence felt more malevolent, and we'd be left feeling as if something unseen was watching us. These were the times when the house truly felt alive, its dark energy palpable and chilling. It was as though the house itself was a living entity, feeding off our fear and uncertainty. We sought help from various experts, but none could offer a solution. Some suggested the house was cursed, while others believed it was a hotspot for residual energies. Regardless of the explanations, the feeling of being haunted persisted. It was as if the house had its own way of reminding us of its presence. In the end, we decided to stay, accepting the house's eerie nature as part of its charm. Living with the supernatural became a new norm, and while the experiences were unsettling, they also made us appreciate the ordinary moments of peace even more. The haunted house had become a part of our lives, a chilling reminder of the unknown that lurked just beyond our understanding. I remember it like it was yesterday. Eerie night in Montana. Julia and I had set up camp in a remote area, miles away from civilization. The chilling wind whispered through the trees, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We were enjoying the serene beauty when we noticed two men lurking in the shadows watching us. They didn't seem like ordinary campers, and their presence sent a wave of unease through both of us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided to keep our campfire burning bright. The men, however, grew bolder, inching closer to our campsite. Julia and I exchanged worried glances, our hearts pounding louder with each step they took. We debated whether to confront them or pack up and leave. But the thick forest around us seemed more haunting in the dark. We chose to stay put, hoping they would lose interest and leave us alone. The hours dragged on, and the men's chilling presence became almost unbearable. We could hear their murmured conversation, but we couldn't make out the words. Fear began to creep in, making every rustle of leaves sound like a predator closing in. I regretted not bringing a weapon, relying only on our makeshift defenses and the flickering firelight. We tried to act nonchalant, but our nerves were clearly fraying. Suddenly, one of the men approached our campfire, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Nice night, isn't it?" he asked, his voice dripping with an eerie calmness. Julia and I forced smiles, our instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. The other man hung back, watching silently, his presence adding to the haunting atmosphere. We exchanged pleasantries, hoping to keep things friendly, but the tension was palpable. First man eventually walked away, rejoining his companion. Julia and I let out a breath we didn't realize we were holding. We decided to take turns keeping watch, knowing sleep would be impossible with the chilling threat so close. As the night wore on, strange noises began to fill the air. Footsteps, whispers, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Every sound seemed amplified, feeding our growing paranoia. Around midnight, we heard a loud snap, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Julia and I jumped to our feet, adrenaline pumping through our veins. We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously moved towards the sound, the beams cutting through the darkness. What we found was a gruesome discovery. A deer, brutally mutilated, body still warm. The sight was haunting, and it was clear that the men had something to do with it. Panicking, we decided it was time to leave. We quickly packed our essentials, abandoning our tent and gear. The forest seemed alive with eerie sounds, the darkness pressing in on us as we made our way back to the car. Every snap of a twig sent our hearts racing, our minds playing tricks on us. Felt like we were being hunted, the shadows around us teeming with unseen threats. We finally reached the car and sped away, the relief of escaping that chilling place washing over us. As we drove, we saw the men in our rearview mirror standing at the edge of the forest, their faces obscured by the darkness. The haunting image stayed with us, a reminder of the night we barely escaped. We didn't stop driving until we were safely back in town, our minds reeling from the terrifying ordeal. In the days that followed, Julia and I couldn't shake the eerie feeling of being watched. We reported the incident to the local authorities, but there was little they could do without more evidence. The gruesome scene we encountered that night left a lasting impression, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the remote corners of the world. We vowed never to camp in such an isolated area again. The experience bonded Julia and me in a way few can understand. We often reflect on that night, sharing our lingering fears and the haunting memories that still send shivers down our spines. It's a story we tell with caution, warning others of the eerie, chilling dangers that can be found in the most unexpected places. I'll never forget the day I met Juliana, a sweet, quiet girl who seemed normal at first glance. Her parents were desperate, claiming their daughter was possessed by something evil. I was skeptical, but agreed to observe her, and what I witnessed was beyond chilling. At night, Juliana's demeanor changed completely, her voice deepening to an unnatural pitch, spouting eerie, haunting threats. The first time I saw Juliana's transformation, I felt an inexplicable coldness in the room. Her eyes, usually bright and innocent, turned dark and menacing. She spoke in languages she couldn't possibly know, her voice echoing with a chilling resonance. Her behavior was violent, lashing out at anyone who came close. The eerie events left me shaken, questioning my beliefs about the supernatural. Her parents sought the help of Father Damien, priest known for handling such cases. He arrived with an air of calm authority, presence oddly reassuring. As he prepared for the exorcism, the atmosphere in the house grew tense. The ritual began with prayers and incantations, the room filled with the scent of burning incense. Juliana's response was immediate and violent, her body contorting in unnatural ways. Father Damien continued undeterred, his voice steady and unwavering. Juliana's screams were bone-chilling, echoing through the house with an otherworldly force. Objects around the room began to shake and fall, adding to the terror. I stood by, feeling utterly helpless, my heart pounding with fear. The priest's resolve was unshakable, his faith a stark contrast to the haunting scene unfolding before us. Hours passed, and the battle between good and evil raged on. Juliana's strength seemed superhuman, her body twisting and turning violently. Father Damien recited prayers louder, his voice commanding the entity to leave. The room grew colder, the air thick with a chilling presence. Felt like we were in the midst of a horror movie, every moment stretching into an eternity of fear and suspense. In a sudden, eerie silence, Juliana collapsed, her body limp and lifeless. For a moment, we feared the worst. Father Damien knelt beside her, continuing his prayers in a softer tone. Slowly, Juliana's breathing returned to normal, her eyes fluttering open. The darkness seemed to lift from the room, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. We dared to hope that the ordeal was over. In the days that followed, Juliana showed signs of improvement. The haunting presence that had once controlled her seemed to have vanished. She began to regain her strength, her eyes returning to their usual brightness. Her parents were cautious but hopeful, watching for any signs of a relapse. The memory of the exorcism lingered, a chilling reminder of the night they almost lost their daughter. Juliana's recovery was slow but steady. She spoke little of what she remembered, only that she felt a constant battle within her. The once haunted house gradually returned to normal, the eerie shadows and chilling atmosphere dissipating. Father Damien checked in regularly, ensuring the entity was truly gone. His calm presence was a source of comfort, his faith unwavering even in the face of such darkness. Years later, Juliana's story became a local legend, a chilling tale whispered around campfires and in hushed conversations. She grew into a strong, resilient woman, forever marked by her haunting experience. The exorcism had changed her, imbuing her with a depth of understanding and empathy that few could comprehend. She often spoke of Father Damien with gratitude, his bravery and faith, beacon of light in her darkest hour. The memory of Juliana's possession remains vivid in my mind. It was a stark reminder of the eerie and inexplicable forces that exist in our world. The experience left me with a profound respect for the unknown and a chilling awareness of the battles that are fought beyond our understanding. It's a story I share with caution, knowing that some truths are too haunting, fully grasped. Juliana's ordeal taught me that faith and resilience can overcome even the darkest of evils. It's a tale of survival and hope, of a family's love and a priest's unwavering faith. The haunting memories linger, but so does the strength and courage of a young girl who faced unimaginable terror and emerged victorious. Our hunting trip to the mountains was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. We had heard about an old ghost town in the area and decided to check it out after a day of tracking deer. As we hiked through the dense forest, the sun began to set, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling washed over us as we approached the ghost town. The The town was eerily silent, with abandoned buildings and overgrown vegetation taking over. We felt a chill as we walked through the deserted streets, our footsteps echoing in the quiet. The place had an otherworldly feel, as if it were frozen in time. We decided to set up camp in what appeared to be the town square, hoping to explore more in the morning. The haunting silence of the town was unsettling, but our curiosity kept us there. As night fell, the atmosphere became more chilling. Strange noises echoed through the empty buildings, and shadows seemed to move on their own. We huddled around our campfire, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. Suddenly, we heard a distant, haunting melody. It was faint but unmistakable, a ghostly tune that sent shivers down our spines. We exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to make of it. Determined to find the source of the music, we grabbed our flashlights and ventured into the darkness. The melody grew louder as we approached an old saloon. The building was barely standing, its windows shattered and doors hanging off their hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The music seemed to emanate from the back room, drawing us deeper into the eerie structure. We cautiously entered the back room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. There, we found an old, decrepit piano, its keys moving on their own. The sight was haunting, and we could hardly believe our eyes. The melody was both beautiful and chilling, filling the room with an eerie presence. We stood frozen, captivated by the supernatural phenomenon unfolding before us. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the room fell into an eerie silence. We turned to leave, but the door slammed shut on its own, trapping us inside. Panic set in as we struggled to open it, the air growing colder by the second. Felt as though we were being watched, an unseen force pressing in on us. We shouted for help, but our voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally gave way, and we stumbled out into the night. The ghost town seemed even more sinister now, with shadows dancing in the moonlight. We decided to leave immediately, abandoning our camp and making our way back to the forest. The eerie presence of the town clung to us, making every step feel like a struggle. As we reached the edge of the forest, we turned back for one last look at the ghost town. To our shock, it had vanished. The buildings, the streets, everything was gone, replaced by an empty clearing. We stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what we had just experienced. The haunting melody still echoed in our minds, a chilling reminder of the night we encountered the impossible. We made our way back to our base camp, shaken and exhausted. The forest seemed more welcoming now, stark contrast to the eerie ghost town. We talked late into the night, trying to make sense of what we had seen. The memory of the piano and the haunting music stayed with us, a chilling tale we would recount for years to come. It was a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. In the days that followed, we researched the area but found no records of the ghost town. It was as if it had never existed. The experience left us questioning our own sanity, but we knew what we had seen. The haunting memory of that night remained with us, chilling encounter with the unknown. It's a story that continues to send shivers down my spine, a reminder of the eerie mysteries that lurk in the shadows. To this day, we avoid that part of the forest. The ghost town may have vanished, but its haunting presence lingers in our mind. Chilling encounter taught us to respect the unknown and to be wary of the places where reality blurs into the supernatural. It's a tale that still haunts our dreams, a chilling reminder of the night we stumbled upon a ghost town that didn't exist. Mike was a patient I met during my stint at a rehabilitation facility. His case was particularly unsettling, characterized by extreme schizophrenia that often left him in a state of confusion and fear. From the moment I met him, there was something haunting about his presence. His eyes, wild and vacant, seemed to see things that were not there. It was as if he was trapped in a chilling world of his own making. One evening, while on my rounds, I heard strange, eerie noises coming from Mike's room. I approached cautiously, the air around me feeling unnaturally cold. Mike was sitting on his bed, mumbling incoherently. His voice fluctuated between soft whispers and violent outbursts. It was as if he was conversing with unseen entities. a hauntingly eerie experience that left me feeling deeply unsettled. I tried to calm him, but his behavior became increasingly erratic. He began talking to someone named Jake, a voice I couldn't hear, but which seemed to dominate his thoughts. The way Mike described Jake was chilling. He spoke of him as a shadowy figure who whispered disturbing things in his ear. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, filled with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. As the days went by, Mike's condition appeared to worsen. He started hearing two distinct voices, one of which was aggressively antagonistic, while the other was soft and pleading. It was eerie how he could switch between these voices, each reflecting a different side of his fractured psyche. The discord between them created a haunting and unsettling environment, making it difficult to know how to help him. One night, I stayed late to observe Mike's behavior, hoping to understand his condition better. The room was dimly lit, and the shadows cast by the furniture seemed to move with a life of their own. Mike began to have a particularly violent episode, his screams echoing through the hallway. The sheer intensity of his emotions was chilling, and I felt an eerie sense of being watched by an unseen presence. During one particularly frightening episode, Mike suddenly stopped speaking and stared blankly at a corner of the room. He began to laugh maniacally, his laughter taking on a haunting, almost sinister quality. It was as if he was interacting with a hidden, malevolent force that only he could see. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthening in a way that seemed almost supernatural. The staff and I tried various interventions, but Mike's condition remained volatile. He would sometimes calm down, only to erupt again with renewed intensity. The constant back and forth between voices was disconcerting, creating an atmosphere of constant tension and unease. Felt like we were fighting an invisible, haunting force that was deeply entrenched in his mind. Despite our best efforts, Mike's episodes continued to grow more severe. The duality of the voices and the dark presence they seemed to convey left us questioning the boundaries between mental illness and something more sinister. His behavior remained unpredictable, a chilling reminder of the complexities and potential horrors of the human mind. Over time, Mike's condition stabilized somewhat with medication and therapy, but the memories of those haunting episodes stayed with me. The eerie experiences left me with a deep respect for the complexities of mental health and a lingering sense of dread about the shadowy figures that seemed to inhabit Mike's world. It was a stark reminder of how the line between reality and the supernatural can sometimes blur in the most unexpected ways. The case of Mike continues to haunt me, not just because of the terrifying episodes, but because of the chilling insights it offered into the nature of fear and perception. It's a story that remains etched in my memory, a reminder of the unsettling possibilities that lie within the human mind and the eerie forces that can accompany them. Moving into the old house on Elm Street was supposed to be a fresh start. It had a charming, vintage appeal, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. From the moment I stepped inside, there was something off. The house had a chilling, unsettling atmosphere, as if the walls held secrets they weren't ready to share. Little did I know, this place was about to become the backdrop for some of the most haunting experiences of my life. The first night was relatively peaceful, but as days passed, strange things began happening. Objects would be misplaced, and an inexplicable cold draft would sweep through the rooms. One night, while lying in bed, I saw a shadowy figure moving across the room. It was an eerie sight, the shape gliding silently, almost as if it were floating. I chalked it up to imagination, but the unease never quite faded. Things took a darker turn when I started seeing what appeared to be doppelgangers of my family members. One evening, I saw a figure that looked exactly like my mother standing in the hallway. I called out to her, but she vanished before my eyes. The sight was so chilling, it left me questioning my sanity. It was as though someone or something was mimicking the people I loved, making the experience all the more disturbing. My fears intensified with the recurring noises, creaks and footsteps that seemed to follow me wherever I went. The sounds grew louder at night, becoming a haunting presence that disturbed my sleep. I'd hear the distinct sound of footsteps walking around the house, only to find nothing when I investigated. The sense of being watched became overwhelming, adding to the already eerie atmosphere of the house. One particularly unsettling night, I was woken by a cold touch on my shoulder. I looked around to find no one there, my heart racing with fear. The feeling of being touched was so real, it was as if a ghostly hand had pressed down on me. The sensation was both chilling and deeply unsettling, leaving me with an intense fear of the dark and the unknown. As time went on, the encounters grew more frequent. I began to experience sudden, unexplained temperature drops and lights flickering on and off by themselves. The house felt alive with a malevolent presence that seemed to grow more aggressive. I started to feel as though the very walls of the house were conspiring against me, trapping me in a never-ending nightmare. One night, things reached a terrifying climax. I was awoken by a loud bang, followed by a soft, eerie whispering that seemed to come from all directions. The whispers were incomprehensible, but they carried a sense of malevolence that chilled me to the bone. I could hardly move, paralyzed by fear as the whispers grew louder, echoing through the room. Following day, I decided to investigate the house's history. I discovered that the previous owners had reported similar experiences. The house had a dark past, several tragic events linked to it. The revelations only deepened the chilling sense that something was terribly wrong. The haunting experiences now seemed to have a sinister context, making them even more disturbing. Eventually, I decided to leave the house, unable to bear the constant fear and unease. The experiences had left me deeply shaken and changed my perception of the supernatural. I moved to a new place, but the memories of the haunting encounters in that old house continued to linger, a chilling reminder of the ghostly presences that once filled my life. To this day, I avoid discussing the experiences with anyone but close friends. The house on Elm Street remains a haunting chapter in my life, a place where reality and the supernatural intertwined in a way that left me forever changed. It's a story that serves as a chilling reminder of the eerie possibilities that can lurk behind even the most ordinary of doors.